The rain began just before sunset. At first it came softly, like a warning whispered across the skies of Lagos. Within minutes, the clouds exploded into a violent downpour that swallowed the streets in silver sheets of water. Cars splashed through flooded roads. Kiki drivers shouted at one another. Street vendors scrambled to cover their goods with nylon. People ran for shelter. Everyone except Amara. She sat quietly beneath the rusty awning of a closed pharmacy, wrapping both arms around her swollen stomach as cold rainwater dripped from the edges above her head. Her oversized sweater, once cream-colored but now faded and worn, clung heavily to her thin body. She was tired, not ordinary tiredness, the kind of exhaustion that lived deep inside the soul. At 26 years old, Amara felt far older than her age. Life had hardened her in ways most people would never understand. Her feet ached from walking the city all day searching for work. Her stomach growled painfully because the only thing she had eaten since morning was half a loaf of stale bread given to her by a sympathetic food seller. Still, she gently rubbed her belly. "Just hold on a little longer," she whispered softly to the baby inside her. A kick answered her. Despite everything, a small smile touched her lips. "You're stubborn already." But the smile faded quickly. Across the road, people laughed inside bright restaurants while music floated through glowing windows. Luxury cars lined the streets. Wealthy couples stepped out beneath umbrellas, untouched by the suffering around them. Amara lowered her eyes. Just 8 months ago, her life had been different. Not perfect, but stable. She had worked as a sales assistant in a clothing store. She rented a tiny apartment in Surulere. She had dreams, plans, hope, and she had loved someone, or at least she thought she had. Tund had promised her marriage, promised forever, promised they would build a beautiful family together. Then she got pregnant. Everything changed. First, he stopped answering calls. Then came excuses. Then silence. Finally, one night, he looked her directly in the eyes and said the words that shattered her world forever. "I'm not ready to ruin my life because of one mistake." One mistake. That was what he called their child. 2 weeks later, her landlord threw her out after months of unpaid rent. The clothing store replaced her when pregnancy made it difficult for her to stand long hours. And just like that, Amara disappeared into the harsh streets of Lagos. Rainwater splashed against her slippers, dragging her back to the present. Her body trembled violently from cold. She glanced upward at the dark sky. "God," she whispered weakly. "I'm trying." Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. "I'm really trying." A loud honk suddenly startled her. Several sleek black SUVs pulled up outside one of the most expensive hotels in the city, the Imperial Grand Hotel. Security guards rushed forward immediately with umbrellas as wealthy guests stepped out. Amara barely looked. Rich people belonged to another world entirely. Then she noticed him. A tall man in a perfectly tailored black suit emerged from the final vehicle. Even from a distance, his presence commanded attention effortlessly. The hotel staff straightened instantly when they saw him. Damian Cole. Amara recognized him immediately from magazines and billboards across the city. Everyone knew Damian Cole, billionaire businessman, owner of luxury hotels, oil investor, real estate mogul. Some called him ruthless. Others called him brilliant. But one thing was certain: he was one of the richest men in Nigeria. Yet tonight, as Damian stepped from the SUV, he looked nothing like the powerful billionaire the media described. He looked exhausted. His face carried the weight of someone fighting invisible battles. His shoulders seemed heavy despite the elegance surrounding him. One of the hotel managers rushed toward him nervously. "Good evening, sir." Damian barely nodded before entering the building. The convoy disappeared inside moments later. Amara sighed quietly. People like him would never know what it felt like to sleep hungry. Never know what it meant to be abandoned. Never know fear. Thunder cracked loudly overhead. She pulled the sweater tighter around herself. Then something caught her eye. Near the curb where the black SUVs had parked, a dark object rested against the wet pavement. At first she ignored it. probably trash. But after a moment, curiosity made her stand slowly despite the ache in her back. Rain soaked her instantly as she crossed the road carefully between passing vehicles. She bent down. A wallet. A very expensive wallet. The black leather gleamed even beneath the rain. Amara looked around quickly. Nobody noticed. Her heartbeat quickened as she opened it. The moment she saw the contents, her breath caught. Stacks of cash. Not hundreds. Thousands. Several platinum bank cards rested inside alongside identification papers. Her hands trembled violently. She pulled out the ID card slowly. Damian Cole. Her eyes widened. The billionaire had dropped his wallet. For several seconds, Amara simply stared at the money. The rain poured harder around her, but she barely noticed anymore. This money could change everything. She could rent a room, buy food, prepare for her baby, visit a proper hospital, maybe even start over completely. Nobody would know. A wealthy billionaire like Damian Cole probably wouldn't even notice the missing cash. Her fingers tightened around the wallet unconsciously. Then suddenly, the baby kicked again. Amara froze. Slowly, tears filled her eyes. "What kind of mother would I be?" she whispered shakily. Her own mother had raised her to value honesty no matter how difficult life became. Even when they struggled. Even when they suffered. "Your integrity is something nobody can steal unless you give it away willingly," her mother used to say. Amara closed the wallet firmly. "No," she whispered. She could not do it. She had already lost her home, her future, and nearly her dignity. She refused to lose herself too. Without giving herself time to reconsider, Amara turned toward the Imperial Grand Hotel. The walk felt endless. The rain battered against her body mercilessly. Her slippers nearly broke twice along the flooded roads. Exhaustion clawed at her with every step. More than once she almost stopped, but somehow she kept moving. By the time she reached the hotel entrance nearly 30 minutes later, she was completely drenched. Luxury cars lined the entrance like a car exhibition. Wealthy guests laughed beneath golden lights while soft music drifted from inside. Amara suddenly became painfully aware of how she looked. Her sweater was worn thin, her slippers muddy, her hair soaked, her pregnancy obvious beneath the fabric. People stared immediately, some with pity, others with disgust. She swallowed hard and approached the entrance carefully. Before she could speak, one security guard blocked her path. "Hey, you can't stand here. I just need to return something," Amara said softly. The second guard frowned suspiciously. "Return what? This wallet belongs to..." "Madam, please leave before we call someone." Embarrassment burned through her chest. "I'm serious," she insisted weakly. "I found..." "We said leave." Several hotel guests glanced toward the commotion. Amara's face burned with humiliation. Then suddenly, "What's going on here?" The deep, commanding voice instantly silenced everyone. Amara turned. Damian Cole stood near the hotel entrance, his expression cold and unreadable. The guards immediately straightened. "Sir," one stammered quickly, "this woman was causing disturbance. She said she wants to return something," the other added dismissively. Damian's sharp gaze shifted toward Amara. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rainwater dripped from her hair onto the marble floor beneath her feet. Slowly, Amara held out the wallet. "I think this belongs to you." Damian frowned slightly before checking his pockets instinctively. His expression changed immediately. He stepped forward quickly and took the wallet from her hands. Opening it, he checked the contents. Everything was there. Every card. Every document. Every bundle of cash. Nothing missing. Damian looked back at her with genuine disbelief. "You found this?" Amara nodded quietly. "Where?" "Near the road outside." "You brought it back yourself?" Another nod. Damian stared at her carefully now, really seeing her for the first time. The soaked clothes, the trembling hands, the exhaustion in her eyes, the visible pregnancy. And yet, despite all that, she had returned a fortune. Most people around him, wealthy executives included, would have stolen from him without hesitation. But this woman standing before him had chosen honesty while having absolutely nothing. Something about that shook him deeply. "You walked all the way here in this rain?" he asked quietly. Amara shrugged weakly. "It was yours." Simple. No expectation and no greed, and no manipulation. Just honesty. For reasons Damian himself couldn't explain, her answer hit him harder than any business deal or boardroom conversation ever had. He looked at her soaked figure again. Then he noticed something else. She was shivering badly. "Have you eaten today?" he asked suddenly. Amara hesitated. That tiny pause told him everything. A strange heaviness settled inside Damian's chest. For 2 years after his wife's death, he had buried himself completely in work. Money had become numbers. Success had become routine. But standing before this homeless pregnant woman, Damian suddenly felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Humanity, compassion, connection. Without another word, he removed his expensive suit jacket and gently placed it over her shoulders. Amara's eyes widened instantly. "Sir, You're freezing," he interrupted softly. The security guards looked stunned. Damian Cole was not known for kindness. Yet here he was, covering a homeless stranger with a designer jacket worth more than most people's yearly salary. "Come inside," Damian said quietly. Amara blinked in confusion. "What?" "You need food. And medical attention if you've been walking around in this condition." "I'm fine," she said automatically. "No," Damian replied gently. "You're not." For the first time in months, someone had looked at her like she mattered. And standing beneath the golden lights of the Imperial Grand Hotel, with rain roaring across the city behind them, Amara felt something dangerous begin to rise inside her chest. Hope. Amara stood frozen beneath the golden lights of the Imperial Grand Hotel lobby, unsure if she was dreaming. The warmth inside the building wrapped around her instantly, making her realize just how cold she had truly been outside. Her wet slippers squeaked softly against the polished marble floor as she followed Damian carefully through the luxurious lobby. Everywhere she looked screamed wealth. Massive crystal chandeliers glittered overhead like stars trapped in glass. Elegant paintings decorated the walls. Soft piano music floated through the air while wealthy guests sat in expensive chairs drinking wine and laughing quietly. Amara felt painfully out of place. People stared openly at her soaked clothes and swollen belly. She lowered her eyes immediately, clutching Damian's suit jacket tightly around herself. Part of her wanted to run. But Damian continued walking calmly as though nothing about her presence embarrassed him. That surprised her more than anything. A hotel manager hurried toward them nervously. "Good evening, Mr. Cole." The man greeted with a respectful bow. "Your meeting with the investors is ready upstairs." "Cancel it," Damian said without slowing down. The manager blinked in confusion. "Sir, I said cancel it." "Yes, sir." The man quickly stepped aside. Amara glanced at Damian in disbelief. "You canceled your meeting because of me?" Damian finally looked at her. "You look like you're about to collapse." The concern in his voice caught her off guard. Nobody had spoken to her that gently in months. Not since life had fallen apart. He led her toward the hotel restaurant, where soft lights glowed warmly against dark wooden walls. A pianist played quietly in the corner while waiters moved elegantly between tables. The moment Amara entered, conversations around them softened. She knew what people saw. A homeless pregnant woman walking beside one of the richest men in Lagos. It didn't make sense. Damian pulled out a chair for her. "Sit." Amara hesitated nervously before obeying. The chair alone felt softer than any bed she had slept on recently. A waiter approached immediately. "Sir, your usual." "Bring everything fresh," Damian interrupted. "And hot tea." The waiter nodded quickly. Within minutes, food began arriving at the table. Rice, chicken, bread, soup, fish, fresh fruit. Amara stared at the dishes in complete disbelief. Her stomach twisted painfully from hunger. "Eat," Damian said softly. At first she tried to remain polite, taking small bites while avoiding eye contact. But after a few minutes, hunger completely took over. She ate desperately, almost forgetting Damian was sitting there watching her. The food tasted unreal. Warm, fresh, comforting. Tears nearly filled her eyes after the first few bites of rice. She hadn't realized how starving she truly was until now. Damian remained quiet during most of the meal, but internally his thoughts were restless. He studied her carefully. Despite the exhaustion written across her face, there was something graceful about her, something gentle. Even now, after clearly suffering so much, she still thanked the waiter every single time another plate arrived. And she had returned his wallet. That alone kept replaying in his mind. The wallet contained enough cash to change someone's life entirely. Yet she hadn't touched a single naira. In Damian's world, honesty was rare. Money changed people. Power corrupted people. Everyone always wanted something from him. Business partners lied. Women pretended. Friends betrayed. Even after his wife died, people treated him more like an opportunity than a grieving man. But this woman, this homeless pregnant stranger, wanted nothing, and somehow that unsettled him deeply. Amara slowly placed down her spoon after finishing the meal. "I'm sorry," she murmured embarrassedly. "I didn't mean to eat so much." Damian frowned slightly. "You apologized for being hungry?" Her cheeks flushed softly. She looked away. "I haven't eaten properly in a while." Something painful tightened in Damian's chest. For a moment he imagined his late wife sitting across from him. Isabella had always been compassionate toward struggling people. She would have helped Amara instantly. The memory hit harder than expected. His expression darkened briefly before he pushed the grief aside. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Amara. That means grace, doesn't it?" She looked surprised. "You know it." A faint smile touched Damian's lips. "My wife loved Nigerian names." The smile vanished almost immediately after mentioning her. Amara noticed the sadness instantly. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Damian looked at her. "For what?" "Your wife." For several seconds he said nothing. Most people avoided mentioning Isabella around him. They feared making him uncomfortable. But Amara spoke naturally, gently, like grief was something she understood too. "She died 2 years ago," Damian finally said quietly. Amara lowered her eyes respectfully. "I'm sorry." The sincerity in her voice felt strangely comforting. Damian leaned back slightly. "And you?" he asked after a moment. "Where is your family?" Amara's fingers tightened around the teacup. The question reopened wounds she tried hard not to think about. "My parents died years ago," she said softly. "My mother first, then my father." Damian listened silently. "I don't really have anyone anymore." "And the baby's father?" The question hung heavily between them. Amara forced a faint smile, but it carried no happiness. "He left." Damian's jaw tightened instantly. "She told him she was pregnant, and he disappeared." She continued quietly. "Eventually he said the baby was a mistake." Anger flashed through Damian's eyes. He glanced unconsciously toward her stomach. How could any man abandon a woman carrying his child, especially one this vulnerable? Amara looked down quickly, embarrassed by the pity she expected to see in his eyes. But pity wasn't there, only anger and concern. "You shouldn't be alone in this condition," Damian said firmly. She laughed softly, though sadness filled the sound. "Life doesn't always give us choices." Damian stared at her again. Even after everything she had suffered, bitterness hadn't consumed her completely. That amazed him. Most people with far less suffering became cruel. But Amara still carried warmth inside her somehow. A silence settled between them. Outside, rain continued crashing against the hotel windows. Then suddenly, Amara winced slightly. Damian noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said quickly. "You're in pain." "It's just my back." He frowned. "How far along are you?" "Almost 8 months." Damian looked horrified. 8 months? And you're sleeping outside?" Amara lowered her eyes. The silence answered for her. For the first time in a long while, Damian felt genuinely ashamed of the world around him. Here he was owning luxury hotels worth billions while a pregnant woman slept on the streets carrying a child. Something about that reality disturbed him deeply. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Richard," he said the moment his assistant answered. "I need a doctor sent to the Imperial Grand immediately." Amara's eyes widened. No, that's not necessary." "It is. But I can't afford." "You're not paying." She fell silent. Nobody had cared whether she lived or died for months. Now suddenly this powerful stranger was treating her like she mattered. Felt unreal. 30 minutes later, a private doctor arrived and checked her carefully in one of the hotel's VIP lounges. Thankfully, the baby was healthy, but Amara was severely exhausted and slightly malnourished. "You need proper rest," the doctor warned firmly. "Stress at this stage is dangerous." Amara nodded quietly. After the doctor left, Damian stood near the window thinking deeply. Then he turned toward her. "Where are you staying tonight?" Amara hesitated. Damian already knew the answer before she spoke. "I usually sleep near a closed shop around Ojota," she admitted quietly. For a moment, Damian simply stared at her. Pregnant. Alone. Sleeping on the streets. Meanwhile, his own mansion had over 15 empty guest rooms. The contrast made him uncomfortable. Without another word, he pulled out a thick envelope of cash and placed it gently on the table. Amara's eyes widened immediately. "That's too much. It'll help you get somewhere safe." She shook her head quickly. "I can't accept all this." "Yes, you can. But I didn't return your wallet for money." Damian believed her instantly. That was the strange part. Usually people pretended humility around him while secretly expecting rewards. But Amara genuinely looked uncomfortable accepting help. "That's exactly why you deserve it," he said quietly. Her eyes filled with tears immediately. She blinked quickly, embarrassed. "You don't have to cry," Damian said softly. "I'm sorry," she whispered shakily. "It's just, nobody has been kind to me in a very long time." Those words hit Damian harder than he expected. He looked away briefly. Kindness. Such a simple thing. Yet somehow the world had starved her of it completely. Amara slowly stood from the chair. "Thank you," she said sincerely, "for the food and everything else." Damian nodded quietly. She adjusted his jacket around herself and turned toward the exit. But something inside Damian suddenly resisted letting her walk away. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. Or maybe it was the memory of his daughter sitting silently inside their massive empty mansion. Before he could stop himself. "Wait." Amara turned. Damian walked toward her slowly. "I need a nanny." She blinked in confusion. "What?" "My daughter is 8 years old," he explained carefully. "Since her mother died. She barely speaks anymore." Pain crossed his face briefly. "She's gone through several nannies already. None of them last." Amara listened quietly. Damian studied her for a moment before continuing. "But tonight," he said softly, "I watched you return enough money to change your life without taking a single naira." He shook his head slightly in disbelief. "That kind of honesty matters to me." Amara stared at him speechlessly. "I know this sounds sudden," he admitted, "but I think my daughter needs someone kind around her more than someone experienced." "You don't even know me," Amara whispered. Damian gave a faint, tired smile. "I know enough." The room fell silent. Amara's heart pounded loudly. A job? A real job? After months of rejection and humiliation? "You'd let me work in your house?" she asked carefully. "Yes." She glanced down at her stomach. "I'm pregnant. I can see that. Aren't you worried people will talk?" Damian almost laughed. People always talk. For the first time that night, a small genuine smile appeared on Amara's face, and Damian noticed instantly how beautiful she truly was beneath all the exhaustion. "You'll have your own room," he continued. "Medical care, food, safety." Amara's eyes filled again. Safety. She had nearly forgotten what that word felt like. "But why?" she asked softly. Damian looked at her carefully before answering. Because my daughter hasn't smiled in 2 years. His voice carried quiet heartbreak now. And for some reason, I think you might change that. Amara stood completely still. Everything about this felt impossible. Like life had suddenly shifted direction without warning. Hours ago she had been sitting hungry beneath the rain, believing the world had forgotten her completely. Now one decision, one honest act, had changed everything. Damian extended his hand toward her. So, he asked gently, what do you say? Amara stared at his hand for several long seconds. Then slowly, she took it. Amara barely slept that night. The hotel suite Damian arranged for her felt too luxurious to be real. The bed alone was larger than the tiny apartment she used to rent before her life collapsed. Soft golden lamps glowed against cream-colored walls, while cool air drifted gently through the room. For the first time in months, she slept somewhere safe. No mosquitoes buzzing around her ears, no fear of thieves, no hard pavement beneath aching bones. Safe. Yet despite the comfort surrounding her, sleep came slowly. Everything that happened that evening replayed endlessly in her mind. Finding the wallet. Returning it. Meeting Damian. The job offer. It all felt impossible. Amara sat near the window, staring out at the glowing Lagos skyline while gently rubbing her stomach. Maybe our lives are changing, she whispered softly to the baby. The child kicked lightly. A small smile touched her lips. At exactly 7 the next morning, there was a soft knock at the door. Amara quickly stood. A middle-aged woman wearing an elegant black uniform smiled warmly as the door opened. Good morning, madam, the woman greeted politely. Amara blinked in confusion. Madam? Nobody had called her that before. I'm Grace, the woman continued kindly. Mr. Cole asked me to assist you this morning. Assist her? Before Amara could respond, several hotel staff entered carrying shopping bags. Expensive shopping bags. Amara stared in shock as dresses, maternity clothes, shoes, toiletries, and even baby supplies were carefully placed around the suite. Her eyes widened. What is all this? Mr. Cole arranged them, Grace explained. He said you needed proper clothing. Amara swallowed hard. Nobody had ever taken care of her like this before. Not even Tund. Tears threatened her eyes again. Grace noticed immediately. He's a good man, the older woman said softly. He hasn't smiled much since his wife died. But yesterday when he returned from the hotel lobby, something about him seemed lighter. Amara looked down quietly. An hour later, after bathing and dressing in one of the new maternity gowns, Amara almost didn't recognize herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked human again. Not broken. Not abandoned. Not invisible. Grace smiled warmly. You're beautiful. Amara laughed shyly. I almost forgot what it feels like to look normal. Grace's expression saddened briefly. No woman carrying a child should suffer the way you have. Those simple words nearly broke Amara emotionally. Before she could respond, her phone rang from the bedside table. She froze. Nobody called her anymore. Carefully, she picked it up. It was Damian. Good morning, his deep voice said calmly. Good morning, sir. You don't have to call me sir. Amara hesitated awkwardly. Sorry, I'm just not used to all this. A faint chuckle escaped him. For some reason, hearing him laugh made her relax slightly. The driver will arrive soon, Damian continued. I thought you should come to the mansion before Sophie leaves for school. At the mention of his daughter, Amara grew nervous again. What if she doesn't like me? A quiet silence followed. She probably won't, Damian admitted honestly. Amara blinked. Then he sighed softly. She hasn't liked anyone since her mother died. Something painful sat beneath his words. Amara's heart ached for him instantly. I'll try my best, she promised gently. That's all I'm asking. 30 minutes later, a sleek black car drove Amara through the wealthy neighborhoods of Lagos. She stared silently through the tinted windows as massive mansions stretched endlessly along perfectly clean roads. This world felt completely different from the harsh streets she had survived on. Eventually, Enormous black gates opened slowly ahead of them. The Cole mansion. Amara's breath caught instantly. The estate looked less like a home and more like a palace. Massive fountains sparkled near the entrance. Perfectly trimmed gardens stretched across acres of land. Luxury cars sat neatly beneath a covered driveway. Her nervousness doubled immediately. "Are you all right, madam?" the driver asked politely. Amara nodded weakly. No, she was definitely not all right. As the car stopped, several house staff lined near the entrance respectfully. Amara stepped out slowly, clutching her small handbag nervously. Then she saw Damian. He stood near the doorway wearing a fitted charcoal suit, speaking briefly with someone on the phone. The morning sunlight highlighted the sharp lines of his face. For a moment, Amara simply stared. The man looked powerful without even trying. Yet there was still sadness hidden beneath his calm expression. When he noticed her, he ended the call immediately. "You made it," he said. Amara nodded. "This place is—" She struggled to find words. Damian gave a faint smile. "Too big. A little." That actually made him laugh softly. The sound surprised both of them. Damian rarely laughed anymore. He gestured toward the entrance. "Come inside." The mansion interior stole Amara's breath completely. Marble floors stretched endlessly beneath sparkling chandeliers. Elegant staircases curved beautifully toward the upper floors while expensive artwork decorated the walls. But despite all the luxury, the house felt empty, cold somehow, too quiet, almost like the mansion itself was grieving. Damian seemed to notice her expression. "It used to feel warmer," he admitted quietly. Amara understood immediately. A house without love was just decoration. One of the housekeepers approached carefully. "Good morning, Mr. Cole. Where's Sophie?" Damian asked. "In the sunroom, sir." His expression tightened slightly. "She hasn't touched breakfast." Of course she hadn't. Amara could already feel the heaviness surrounding the child she hadn't even met yet. Damian turned toward her. "There's something you should understand before meeting her." Amara listened carefully. "She doesn't speak much anymore. Some days not at all." Pain flickered briefly across his face. "After Isabella died, Sophie changed completely." Amara's chest tightened softly. "How did your wife die?" she asked carefully. Damian looked away toward the staircase. "Car accident." The silence afterward felt heavy. "She and Sophie were very close," he continued quietly. "When Isabella died, it was like part of Sophie disappeared too." Amara swallowed hard. An 8-year-old child carrying grief that heavy. No wonder the mansion felt lifeless. "She stopped laughing," Damian whispered. The words sounded like a confession, like heartbreak. "She stopped playing, stopped singing. Even her teachers became worried." Amara looked at him gently. "And you?" Damian blinked slightly. "What about me? Who worried about you?" The question caught him off guard completely. Nobody asked him that anymore. People only cared whether Damian Cole remained strong, successful, and powerful, not whether he was hurting. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then finally, "I buried myself in work," he admitted quietly. Amara nodded softly, because sometimes pain became easier to survive when you stayed busy enough not to feel it. "Come," Damian said after a moment. "You should meet her." They walked quietly through the mansion until they reached a large sunroom filled with books, toys, and enormous windows overlooking the gardens. An 8-year-old girl sat near the far corner quietly drawing. Sophie. Amara's heart immediately softened. The child was beautiful. Soft brown skin, curly hair tied neatly into 2 puffs, large expressive eyes. But those eyes, they carried sadness far too old for someone so young. Sophie didn't look up as they entered. Damian's voice softened instantly. "Sweetheart." No response. "Sophie?" The little girl finally glanced upward briefly before lowering her eyes again. "This is Amara," Damian said gently. "She'll be staying with us." Nothing. Not even curiosity. Sophie simply continued drawing silently. Amara glanced toward the paper. A family portrait. 3 figures stood beneath a bright yellow sun. but one figure had angel wings. Her mother. Painful lump formed in Amara's throat. Damian quietly rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "This is usually how introductions go," he admitted softly. Amara gave a small understanding nod. She slowly approached Sophie carefully, lowering herself into the chair nearby. "You draw beautifully," she said gently. Sophie didn't answer, but Amara noticed the little girl's fingers tighten slightly around the crayon. That meant she heard her. "I used to love drawing too when I was younger," Amara continued softly, "although mine looked terrible." Still no response. Damian watched quietly from the doorway. Most nannies would already be trying too hard, forcing conversation, acting overly cheerful, pushing Sophie emotionally. But Amara simply sat there calmly, patiently, like silence didn't scare her. After several minutes, Sophie suddenly spoke. "She's dead." Her voice was tiny, fragile. Amara looked gently at the drawing. "Your mommy?" Sophie nodded without looking up. Damian froze slightly near the doorway. Sophie almost never mentioned Isabella anymore. Amara's chest tightened painfully. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "She used to sing to me," Sophie murmured softly. The room fell silent. Damian slowly looked away, emotion flickering across his face. Amara swallowed carefully. "My mother used to sing to me too." For the first time, Sophie looked directly at her. Really looked at her. "What happened to her?" "She died when I was younger." Sophie stared quietly. Children recognized pain faster than adults sometimes. And in that moment, Sophie realized this woman understood sadness too. Amara smiled softly. "She used to sing whenever I got scared during thunderstorms." Sophie looked toward the rainy clouds forming outside the windows. "I don't like storms," the little girl admitted quietly. Damian's eyes widened slightly. Sophie was actually talking. Amara leaned back gently in her chair. "You know," she whispered conspiratorially, "I used to believe thunder was just angels moving furniture in heaven." A tiny flicker appeared in Sophie's eyes. Almost amusement. Almost. Damian noticed instantly. Hope stirred faintly inside him. Then suddenly a loud crack of thunder echoed outside. Sophie flinched hard. Instinctively, Amara reached for her hand. "It's okay," she whispered softly. To Damian's complete shock, Sophie didn't pull away. The little girl simply sat there quietly holding Amara's hand while rain began tapping gently against the windows. Something shifted in the room then. Something small, but important. For the first time in a very long time, Sophie looked slightly less alone. That evening, long after dinner, Damian stood outside Sophie's bedroom quietly watching through the slightly open door. Inside, Amara sat beside the bed humming softly, while Sophie listened silently beneath her blanket. The lullaby was old and gentle, peaceful. Sophie's eyes slowly began drifting closed. And for the first time in nearly 2 years, she fell asleep without crying. Damian felt emotion rise suddenly in his chest so powerfully it nearly stole his breath. He stepped away from the doorway quickly before either of them noticed the tears gathering in his eyes. Because somehow, in just one day, the homeless pregnant stranger he found in the rain had already brought something back into his home that money could never buy. Peace. The first week inside the Cole mansion felt unreal to Amara. Every morning she woke expecting to find herself back beneath the leaking awning outside the pharmacy, curled against the cold pavement with passing cars splashing dirty water nearby. But instead, she woke inside a warm bedroom with soft cream curtains and sunlight pouring gently through enormous windows. For the first few days, she still moved around the mansion cautiously, afraid she might break something simply by touching it. The staff treated her respectfully because Damian had made it clear that she was to be treated as part of the household. But Amara still noticed the occasional curious glances. After all, rumors traveled fast. Nobody understood why the great Damian Cole suddenly brought a pregnant homeless woman into his home. Even Amara herself struggled to understand it sometimes. Yet, despite the confusion surrounding her arrival, one thing became obvious quickly. Damian's daughter was slowly changing. Not dramatically, not overnight, but little by little. Sophie began allowing Amara into the quiet world she had built around herself after losing her mother. And Damian noticed every single difference. The first change happened at breakfast 3 mornings later. Usually, Sophie refused to eat with anyone. The little girl often sat silently pushing food around her plate before asking to leave the table. But this morning, Amara walked into the dining room holding a tray carefully. "Special delivery," she announced softly. Sophie looked up curiously. Amara placed the tray down dramatically. Pancakes, but not ordinary pancakes. They were shaped like animals. One looked like a lion with banana slices for a mane. Another resembled a smiling elephant with strawberry ears. Sophie blinked. Damian nearly smiled immediately at the confused expression on his daughter's face. Amara lowered herself carefully into the chair beside her. "I should warn you," she whispered seriously. "The lion pancake is very rude." Sophie frowned slightly. "What?" "He insulted my cooking this morning." Tiny pause. Then, "Pancakes can't talk." Amara gasped dramatically. "Oh no. He told me not to tell anyone." Damian quietly lowered his coffee cup to hide the smile threatening his lips. Sophie stared suspiciously at the pancake lion for several seconds. Then quietly, very quietly, the corners of her mouth twitched upward. It wasn't quite a smile yet, but it was close. And for Damian, that tiny movement felt bigger than million-dollar business deals. The billionaire sat silently watching Amara throughout breakfast. The woman had a gift. Not forced cheerfulness. Not fake sympathy. She simply treated Sophie like a child instead of a tragedy. And somehow that was reaching the little girl in ways therapy and expensive specialists never could. Later that afternoon, Amara found Sophie alone in the mansion library drawing again. Sunlight poured across the massive room, casting golden light over shelves lined with books from floor to ceiling. Sophie sat curled into one corner with crayons scattered around her. Amara slowly approached. "What are we drawing today?" Sophie hesitated before turning the sketchbook slightly. "Flowers. Beautiful ones." Amara smiled softly. "These are gorgeous. My mommy liked flowers," Sophie whispered quietly. There was still sadness whenever she mentioned Isabella, but now the sadness sounded less like a wound bleeding endlessly and more like grief slowly learning how to breathe. Amara sat beside her carefully. "What was your mommy like?" Sophie's eyes lit softly for the first time. "She smelled nice." Amara smiled. "That's important. And she used to dance while cooking." "That sounds dangerous." A tiny laugh escaped Sophie unexpectedly. Both of them froze. The little girl immediately became shy afterward, lowering her eyes quickly. But Amara pretended not to notice. Instead, she leaned closer to inspect the drawing. "You know," she whispered seriously, "these flowers need help." Sophie looked confused. "They do." "Yes, they're lonely." "How can flowers be lonely?" "Simple. They need butterflies." For the next hour, the two of them sat together coloring butterflies across the pages, while soft music played quietly from somewhere inside the mansion. And upstairs, standing near the balcony overlooking the library entrance, Damian watched silently. He had been returning from a business call when he heard it. A sound he thought he might never hear again. Sophie laughing. Not loudly, not fully, but enough. Enough to stop him in his tracks completely. The sound shattered something inside his chest. For 2 years, silence had swallowed this mansion whole. After Isabella died, Sophie's grief became like a shadow that darkened every room. Nothing worked. Therapists, vacations, new toys, new schools. Nothing brought back the little girl he once knew. Until now. And somehow, the person slowly bringing Sophie back to life was a homeless pregnant woman who entered their lives by accident. Damian rubbed his eyes quietly. Emotion overwhelmed him unexpectedly. He missed Isabella every day. But for the first time since losing her, hope no longer felt impossible. Days slowly turned into weeks. The atmosphere inside the mansion began changing in small, beautiful ways. Sophie now waited excitedly outside Amara's room every morning. They baked cookies together, read bedtime stories together, played simple games in the garden. And little by little, Sophie began talking more. Not only to Amara.to everyone. The house staff noticed first. She said thank you to me today. One maid whispered emotionally to another. She smiled at breakfast. Another replied in disbelief. Even Damian's driver mentioned hearing Sophie singing softly in the back seat one morning. The mansion itself seemed warmer now, more alive, and at the center of it all was Amara. One evening, Damian returned home exhausted after an especially difficult business meeting. The moment he entered the mansion, he heard something unusual. Music, laughter, real laughter. Confused, he followed the sound toward the kitchen. Then he stopped in the doorway. The sight before him completely froze him in place. Flour covered almost every surface in the kitchen, including the people. Sophie stood on a stool laughing uncontrollably while Amara tried unsuccessfully to clean cupcake batter from her face. "Oh no!" Amara gasped dramatically. The kitchen exploded. Sophie burst into louder laughter. "You dropped the flour. You distracted me. I didn't do anything." You breathed suspiciously. Damian stared silently. His daughter was laughing. Not a small smile. Not a tiny giggle. Full laughter. The kind that filled the entire room with light. For one painful, beautiful moment, Damian saw traces of the little girl Sophie used to be before grief stole her joy away. And suddenly, tears filled his eyes. He quickly looked away, emotionally overwhelmed. But Sophie noticed him immediately. "Daddy!" She jumped down from the stool excitedly and ran toward him. "Look what happened." Damian blinked rapidly, trying to steady himself emotionally. "I can see that," he managed softly. Amara turned nervously, immediately embarrassed. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. The cupcakes got slightly out of control. "Slightly?" Sophie laughed. Damian looked between them quietly. Flour dusted Amara's cheeks and hair. She looked exhausted but happy. Truly happy. And Sophie stood beside her glowing with life Damian had not seen in years. The billionaire swallowed hard. "You're laughing," he whispered to his daughter almost unconsciously. Sophie blinked. Then slowly her smile faded slightly as if she realized it too. The room became quiet. For a moment, grief passed across the little girl's face again. "I forgot," she whispered softly. Damian's heart broke instantly. Amara knelt carefully beside Sophie. "You don't have to feel guilty for being happy," she said gently. Sophie looked down. "But Mommy died." Amara's expression softened painfully. "Yes," she whispered. "And that hurt very much." The kitchen remained completely silent. "But your mommy loved your smile, didn't she?" Sophie nodded slowly. "Then I don't think she would want grief to steal it forever." Tears gathered in the little girl's eyes. Damian looked away immediately, emotionally wrecked by the conversation unfolding before him, because Amara understood something nobody else had understood. Grief wasn't something you forced away. You carried it gently while still allowing yourself permission to live. Sophie suddenly hugged Amara tightly, and Damian felt tears slide silently down his own face. He turned away before either of them could notice. But inside his chest, something shifted deeply, because for the first time in 2 years, his home no longer felt haunted by sadness alone. That night after dinner, Sophie refused to sleep unless Amara read her a bedtime story. Damian stood near the bedroom doorway, listening quietly as Amara animated different voices dramatically, while Sophie giggled beneath her blanket. "She sounds happier," Grace whispered softly from beside him. Damian nodded silently. "She saved this house," the older woman continued gently. Damian's eyes drifted back toward the bedroom. Amara sat on the edge of Sophie's bed, rubbing her belly absently while reading aloud. Her voice carried warmth through the room effortlessly. She looked like she belonged there. The realization startled him more than expected, because somewhere during the past few weeks, Amara had stopped feeling like a temporary guest. She had become part of their lives, part of his life, and that frightened him slightly. After Isabella's death, Damian swore he would never love again. The pain had nearly destroyed him. Loving someone meant risking loss, risking heartbreak, risking grief. He buried himself in work precisely because work could not die unexpectedly. But now, every time he saw Amara smile at Sophie, every time he heard her soft laugh, every time she looked at his daughter with genuine love, something dangerous stirred quietly inside him. Something warm, human, alive. Damian leaned against the hallway wall heavily. Grace studied him knowingly. "You care about her," the older woman said carefully. Damian immediately looked away. "She's good for Sophie." Grace smiled faintly. "That's not what I said." Before he could answer, Sophie's laughter echoed softly from the bedroom again. Damian closed his eyes briefly, because deep down, he already knew Grace was right, and that terrified him. Later that night, after Sophie finally fell asleep, Amara quietly walked downstairs toward the kitchen for water. She nearly jumped when she found Damian standing alone near the living room window holding a glass of whiskey. "Sorry," she said softly. "I didn't know anyone was awake." Damian turned slightly. "You should be sleeping." She laughed quietly. "So should you." A faint smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." Rain tapped gently against the massive windows while silence settled comfortably between them. Then Damian spoke quietly. "Thank you." Amara blinked. "For what?" "For today." Understanding softened her face immediately. "She's an amazing little girl." "She wasn't always this quiet," Damian admitted softly. "Before Isabella died, Sophie used to fill every room with noise." Pain flickered through his eyes again. "I thought I lost that version of her forever." Amara looked at him gently. "She's still there." Damian studied her silently for several seconds. "You really believe that?" "Yes." "How?" Amara glanced toward the staircase where Sophie slept upstairs. "Because grief hides people sometimes," she whispered softly. "But love can bring them back." Damian stared at her, and in that moment, something inside him began falling hopelessly, dangerously in love with the woman standing before him. The Cole mansion no longer felt empty. That was the first thing Damian noticed one quiet Sunday morning as he stood upstairs overlooking the grand living room below. For 2 years after Isabella's death, silence had consumed the house like a heavy fog. Every room felt too large, too cold, too still. Even the staff moved carefully, almost whispering, as though the mansion itself might break beneath the weight of grief. But now, laughter floated through the halls again. Soft music played from somewhere downstairs. The smell of pancakes drifted from the kitchen, and Sophie's voice echoed faintly through the house. Damian closed his eyes briefly. He had missed this more than he realized. Downstairs, Amara stood near the kitchen counter trying unsuccessfully to flip a pancake while Sophie giggled uncontrollably beside her. "You flipped it too hard." Sophie laughed. "It attacked me first," Amara argued dramatically. Pancake batter had somehow landed on the floor, the counter, and even Amara's sleeve. Sophie laughed harder. Damian leaned quietly against the upstairs railing, unable to stop the smile tugging at his lips. The sound of his daughter laughing still felt like a miracle, and somehow Amara made it happen so naturally. Not through pressure, not through force, simply through kindness. That frightened Damian more than he wanted to admit, because every single day his feelings for her grew stronger, and he had no idea what to do about it. Later that afternoon, Sophie insisted on having a picnic in the mansion garden. "The flowers are lonely," she declared seriously. Amara laughed softly. "Well, we can't let them suffer." The garden behind the Cole mansion stretched endlessly with perfectly trimmed hedges, fountains, and colorful flowers blooming beneath the warm Lagos sunlight. Blankets were spread beneath a large tree, while Sophie carefully arranged sandwiches on tiny plates like an important hostess. Damian arrived midway through a business call, pausing when he spotted them from across the garden. Sophie waved excitedly. "Daddy, come sit." Normally, Damian would have continued working. Before Amara entered their lives, work had become his escape. Endless meetings and contracts distracted him from grief. But now, he found himself wanting to stay, wanting to be present. He ended the call immediately and walked toward them. Amara looked up as he approached. For a brief second, their eyes met. Something warm and dangerous passed silently between them. Damian looked away first. Sophie patted the empty space beside her dramatically. "You're late," she informed him. "I apologize," Damian replied seriously while sitting down. "You should." Amara burst into laughter. Damian glanced toward her instinctively, momentarily distracted by how beautiful she looked beneath the sunlight. Pregnancy softened her features gently. Her loose dress moved lightly in the breeze while laughter lit up her face in ways that made Damian's chest tighten unexpectedly. She looked alive, and somehow she made everyone around her feel alive too. "Daddy?" Sophie suddenly whispered loudly. "I think Amara cheated." Amara gasped. "What?" "You took the bigger sandwich. It's called survival." Sophie giggled again. Damian shook his head quietly. "I see both of you are trouble." "Yes," Sophie replied proudly. Amara raised her hand. "I blame the pregnancy." The three of them sat together beneath the tree while warm sunlight filtered softly through the branches above. And for the first time in years, Damian felt something close to peace. That evening, after Sophie fell asleep, Damian found Amara alone in the kitchen drinking tea. The mansion was quiet now. Only the soft ticking of a nearby clock filled the silence. Amara looked up as he entered. "You're still awake?" Damian loosened his tie tiredly. "Long day." She studied him carefully. "You work too much." A faint smile touched his lips. "You sound like Isabella." The moment the words left his mouth, silence followed. Damian rarely spoke about his late wife this casually. Amara lowered her eyes gently. "She sounds like she loved you very much." Damian leaned against the counter quietly. "She did." Pain flickered across his face briefly. "And I loved her." Amara nodded softly. No jealousy, no discomfort. Just understanding. That alone made Damian feel strangely comfortable around her. Most women became awkward whenever Isabella's name appeared. But Amara never acted threatened by the memory of the woman Damian once loved. Instead, she respected it. And somehow that made him trust her even more. "She was the kindest person I ever knew," Damian continued quietly. "She could walk into a room and make people feel safe immediately." Amara smiled faintly. "That sounds familiar." Damian looked at her. "I mean it," she said softly. "You still love her deeply." He looked away toward the dark window. "I don't know how to stop." "You're not supposed to." Damian blinked slightly. Amara wrapped both hands around her teacup carefully. "When someone we love dies, the love doesn't disappear with them," she whispered. "We just learn how to carry it differently." The words settled deeply inside him. For a moment, Damian simply stared at her silently. Then he asked the question that had lingered in his mind for weeks. "How do you stay so kind?" Amara looked surprised. "After everything you've been through," he continued quietly, "most people would become bitter." A sad smile touched her lips. "Some days I almost did." The honesty in her voice made him listen even closer. "There were nights I hated everyone," she admitted softly, "especially after the baby's father left." Pain flickered behind her eyes now. Damian's jaw tightened instantly. He hated that unknown man more every time he heard about him. "I kept asking myself what I did wrong," she continued quietly. "I thought maybe I wasn't pretty enough, smart enough, good enough." Damian frowned immediately. "Don't." Amara blinked. "Don't talk about yourself like that," he said firmly. The intensity in his voice startled her slightly. Damian exhaled slowly before speaking again. "Any man who abandoned you is a fool." Their eyes locked. The air suddenly felt heavier somehow. Too close. Too personal. Amara looked away first, her heartbeat suddenly uneven. To break the tension, she laughed softly. "Well, at least the baby got my good looks." That made Damian laugh unexpectedly. A real laugh. The sound surprised both of them. Amara smiled warmly. "There it is." "What?" "You." Damian frowned slightly. "You spend so much time hiding behind work and seriousness," she said gently. But sometimes you laugh before you remember you're supposed to be sad. Her words hit him deeply, because she was right. After Isabella's death, Damian stopped allowing himself joy. Somewhere inside his grief, he began believing happiness would somehow betray the memory of the woman he lost. But Amara made happiness feel possible again, and that terrified him. The following week, Sophie's school invited parents for a small art exhibition showcasing student projects. At first, Sophie refused to attend. "There'll be too many people," she whispered nervously. Amara knelt beside her carefully. "You don't have to be afraid. What if they ask about Mommy?" Amara's heart ached instantly. Children could be cruel without meaning to. Damian sat nearby listening quietly. Before he could speak, Amara gently held Sophie's hands. "Then you tell them the truth." Sophie looked uncertain. "That your mommy loved you very much." The little girl swallowed hard. "And what if I cry?" Amara smiled softly. "Then I'll cry with you." Damian looked away immediately, emotionally overwhelmed again. Because somehow, every time Amara spoke to Sophie, she knew exactly what the child needed to hear. The exhibition took place Friday afternoon. Parents filled the school hall while children proudly showed off paintings and projects. Sophie stayed close to Amara the entire time, holding her hand tightly. Damian noticed the whispers almost immediately. Some parents recognized Amara from gossip spreading quietly around Lagos society. The homeless pregnant woman living in Damian Cole's mansion. Judgment flashed across several faces. Damian's expression darkened instantly. But before he could react, Sophie proudly pulled Amara toward her artwork display. "Look!" A large painting hung across the wall. 3 figures stood beneath a bright blue sky holding hands. One was clearly Sophie. Another was Damian. And the third, Amara. Near them was a tiny baby wrapped in blue cloth. At the top, written in colorful letters, were the words, "My family." Damian froze completely. So did Amara. Sophie suddenly looked nervous. "I know she's not really family yet," the little girl whispered quickly. "I just wanted her to be." Amara's eyes filled with tears instantly. Damian felt emotion crash through him so powerfully he struggled to breathe for a second. Family. That word should not have affected him this deeply. But somehow it did. Because deep down, part of him wanted it too. Amara quickly hugged Sophie tightly. "I would be honored to be your family," she whispered emotionally. Sophie smiled shyly against her shoulder. And Damian stood there silently realizing something terrifying. He no longer viewed Amara as temporary. Somewhere along the way, she had become essential. That night, rain poured heavily outside while Sophie slept peacefully upstairs after exhausting herself at school. Amara sat curled into the living room sofa rubbing her swollen belly tiredly. Damian entered quietly carrying 2 cups of tea. "One for you," he said. She smiled softly. "You're starting to memorize my tea habits. You drink enough of it." He sat beside her. Not too close. But not far either. The storm outside echoed softly through the mansion. For a while, neither spoke. Then Amara suddenly winced quietly. Damian turned instantly. "What happened?" The baby kicked. His expression softened immediately. Without thinking, he leaned slightly closer. "Can I?" Amara hesitated briefly before nodding. Carefully, Damian placed his hand against her stomach. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then suddenly, kick. Damian's eyes widened completely. Amara laughed softly at his stunned expression. "He likes dramatic entrances." Damian stared at her belly in amazement. Another kick followed. Something shifted painfully inside his chest then. Not fear. Not sadness. Something warm. Something dangerous. Because sitting there beside Amara, feeling the tiny life move beneath his hand, for the first time in years, Damian imagined a future again. And that realization changed everything. The rainstorm began just after sunset. Dark clouds rolled across the Lagos skyline, while heavy winds rattled the windows of the Cole mansion. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating the enormous estate in silver light before darkness swallowed it again. Inside the mansion, Sophie sat curled on the living room couch beside Amara, clutching a blanket nervously. "I don't like storms," the little girl whispered. Amara gently rubbed her back. "I know." Thunder cracked loudly overhead. Sophie immediately moved closer. Amara smiled softly. "You know what my mother used to say?" Sophie looked up curiously. "What?" She said thunder was just angels arguing over who makes the best jollof rice. Sophie blinked, then suddenly laughed. "Angels eat jollof? The good ones do." Another burst of laughter escaped the little girl. At that exact moment, the lights flickered once, twice, then the entire mansion went dark. Sophie gasped. Outside, rain slammed violently against the windows. "It's okay," Amara whispered quickly. "The generator will come on soon." But several seconds passed. Nothing happened. Somewhere downstairs, staff voices echoed faintly in confusion. Sophie grabbed Amara's hand tighter. Amara stood carefully. "Stay here. I'll get candles." Before Sophie could protest, another flash of lightning lit the room. And for a split second, Damian appeared in the doorway. He had just returned home from work, rain soaking his suit slightly despite the umbrella held above him moments earlier by security. "Daddy!" Sophie cried in relief. Damian walked toward them immediately. "What happened?" "The generator isn't working," Amara explained softly. Damian sighed. Perfect timing. The billionaire loosened his tie tiredly before crouching beside Sophie. "You all right, sweetheart?" Sophie nodded quickly. "Amara says angels eat jollof rice." Damian looked at Amara with amusement. "Interesting theology." Amara grinned slightly. "I stand by it." For a moment, the three of them remained together in the dark living room while rain echoed around the mansion. Then suddenly the emergency backup lights flickered dimly to life, casting a soft golden glow across the room. Felt strangely intimate, quiet, warm. Damian looked toward Sophie. "Why don't we make this an adventure?" The little girl's eyes brightened immediately. "What kind?" "A candlelight camping night indoors." Sophie gasped dramatically. "In the mansion?" "Yes. With snacks." Damian looked serious. "Especially snacks." Sophie jumped up excitedly. Amara laughed softly as the little girl ran off toward the kitchen. The moment Sophie disappeared upstairs to gather pillows, silence settled between Amara and Damian. Soft golden emergency lights glowed across the room while thunder rumbled outside. Damian looked tired tonight, more than usual. Amara noticed immediately. "Tough day?" she asked gently. He exhaled slowly. "You could say that." For a moment, he simply stood there watching rain slide down the giant windows. Then quietly, "Some days I get tired of everyone needing something from me." The honesty surprised her. Damian rarely spoke about himself. "Business problems?" He laughed softly without humor. "Business, investors, expectations, endless meetings." He shook his head slightly. "Sometimes I feel like a machine everyone depends on." Amara studied him carefully. "And who do you depend on?" The question caught him completely off guard. He looked at her slowly. Nobody asked him questions like that. Nobody cared enough to. Powerful men were expected to carry everything alone. Damian leaned against the nearby wall quietly. "After Isabella died," he admitted softly, "I stopped depending on people." The room felt smaller somehow, more personal. "She was the only person who saw me before the money," he continued quietly. "Before the business empire. Before all this." Amara listened silently. "She used to force me to rest," Damian said with a faint smile. "Sometimes she'd literally take my laptop away." Amara laughed softly. "She sounds fearless." She was. For a brief moment, grief passed through his eyes again. But this time something else existed beside it. Warmth. Because talking about Isabella no longer felt unbearable around Amara. And that alone meant more to Damian than he could explain. "She would have liked you," he admitted quietly. Amara blinked slightly. "You think so?" "I know so." Their eyes met, and suddenly the air between them felt dangerously different. Before either could speak again, Sophie came rushing downstairs carrying far too many blankets. Camping time! The moment shattered instantly. Damian stepped back quickly. Amara looked away. Neither understood why their hearts were suddenly beating so fast. The indoor camping idea became chaos almost immediately. Sophie insisted on building a giant blanket fort in the middle of the living room while Damian unsuccessfully tried following her complicated instructions. "No, Daddy. The pillow goes there. It is there. No, that's the wrong there." Amara burst into laughter watching Damian Cole, one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, lose an argument to an 8-year-old over blanket architecture. "This is harder than running companies," Damian muttered. "You're failing construction," Sophie informed him seriously. Amara laughed harder. Eventually, after several collapsed blanket disasters, the fort finally stood. Barely. The three of them sat inside surrounded by candles while rain continued pouring outside. Sophie leaned happily against Amara while eating popcorn. "This is fun," she whispered sleepily. Damian stared at his daughter quietly. She looked peaceful, happy, alive again, and sitting beside her, gently rubbing her hair while smiling softly, Amara looked like she had always belonged there. The realization hit Damian painfully, because somewhere deep inside himself, he no longer wanted her to leave, ever. The thought frightened him. After Isabella's death, Damian promised himself he would never open his heart again. Loving someone meant vulnerability, risk, pain. He survived losing Isabella by shutting down emotionally, by becoming cold enough to function. But Amara changed everything simply by existing. She brought life back into his home, light back into Sophie's eyes, warmth back into his heart. And Damian was losing the ability to pretend otherwise. Sophie yawned loudly beside them. Amara smiled. "I think somebody's getting sleepy." "No," Sophie lied immediately while yawning again. Damian chuckled softly. 5 minutes later, the little girl was asleep curled beside Amara beneath the blankets. The storm outside softened gradually. Candles flickered gently around the room. And for a long moment, Damian simply watched Amara stroke Sophie's curls carefully while trying not to wake her. "You're good with her," he said quietly. Amara glanced up. "She's easy to love." The words landed heavily inside his chest. Easy to love. Yes, she was. Damian sat across from her inside the blanket fort, his expression unreadable in the candlelight. "You know," he said softly, "she talks about you constantly when you're not around." Amara smiled faintly. "She told me today that she wants to teach the baby how to paint." Damian shook his head quietly with amusement. "She's already planning her big sister responsibilities." Silence settled again, but not uncomfortable silence. The kind that existed between people slowly becoming important to each other. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. Inside, candlelight danced across Amara's face softly. Damian couldn't stop looking at her. And eventually, Amara noticed. Her breath caught slightly. The intensity in his eyes made her heartbeat quicken unexpectedly. Neither looked away. For weeks now, something had been growing between them quietly. In stolen glances, late-night conversations, shared laughter, moments too intimate to ignore anymore. And tonight, beneath candlelight and storms, pretending became impossible. Damian spoke first. "You changed this house." Amara's chest tightened softly. "You changed us." His voice was low now, emotional, raw in a way she had never heard before. Amara looked down briefly. "I didn't mean to." "I'm glad you did." The room suddenly felt too small for all the emotions between them. Damian leaned slightly closer. "You brought Sophie back to life," he whispered. "Do you know what that means to me?" Amara swallowed hard. "She was already there," she whispered back softly. "She just needed love around her again." "And me?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Amara looked up slowly. Damian's eyes held something vulnerable now. Something dangerous. "What about you?" he asked quietly. "What did you do to me?" Her heartbeat stumbled painfully, because she already knew the answer. She had fallen for him too. The realization terrified her. This was Damian Cole, a billionaire, a widower still carrying grief, a man from a world completely different from hers. And she was a homeless pregnant woman carrying another man's child. This could only end painfully. Yet somehow, every time he looked at her, she forgot all the reasons she should stay away. "You scare me sometimes," she admitted softly. Damian frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because you make this feel real." Emotion flickered across his face instantly. "Amara." She shook her head gently. "I wasn't supposed to stay," she whispered. "This was supposed to be temporary." Damian's jaw tightened immediately. "Do you want to leave?" "No." The answer came too quickly, too honestly. Something shifted in his expression then. Relief, hope, desire. Slowly, Damian reached toward her face. Every nerve in Amara's body awakened instantly. His fingers brushed gently against her cheek. Warm, careful, reverent. "You have no idea what you mean to us," he whispered. Tears gathered unexpectedly in Amara's eyes. Nobody had ever looked at her the way Damian did now. Like she mattered, like she was precious, like she belonged. And after everything life had done to her, that feeling nearly broke her emotionally. Damian moved closer slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. The storm outside faded into background noise. The world narrowed into candlelight and heartbeats. Then finally, he kissed her, softly, carefully, like something fragile he feared breaking. Amara melted instantly. Emotion crashed through both of them with terrifying force. The kiss carried weeks of unspoken feelings. Loneliness, healing, hope. And when they finally pulled apart slightly, neither could breathe properly. Damian rested his forehead gently against hers. "We shouldn't do this," he whispered hoarsely. Amara laughed shakily through tears. "I know." But neither moved away, because after years of grief, after months of suffering, two broken hearts had finally found each other. And somewhere upstairs, beyond the storm and silence of the mansion, life was quietly beginning again. The morning after the kiss felt different. Not awkward, not uncomfortable, just changed. Amara woke slowly beneath soft cream blankets while sunlight filtered through the curtains of her room. For a few peaceful seconds, she simply stared at the ceiling, trying to convince herself the previous night had really happened. Damian kissed her. The thought alone sent warmth rushing through her chest again. Then reality quickly followed behind it. He was Damian Cole, one of the richest men in the country. And she, a pregnant woman who once slept on the streets. Amara sat up slowly, rubbing her forehead nervously. What happened now? Would he regret it? Pretend it never happened? Pull away completely? Her stomach twisted anxiously. Before she could think further, there was a knock at her door. Amara's heartbeat jumped instantly. "Come in," she called softly. The door opened, but instead of Damian, Sophie burst into the room dramatically. "Emergency!" Amara blinked. "What happened?" "The baby kicked me." Amara stared at her for 2 confused seconds before Sophie ran over excitedly and placed both hands on Amara's stomach. "He moved while I was talking to him." Amara burst into laughter. "Oh, that emergency. It's serious," Sophie whispered loudly. "I think he likes me more than you." That made Amara laugh harder. The sound filled the room warmly, and leaning quietly against the half-open doorway, Damian smiled. He had arrived moments earlier intending to speak privately with Amara, but the sight before him stopped him completely. Sophie curled beside Amara on the bed, both of them laughing softly, morning sunlight glowing around them. It looked painfully beautiful, like a picture of the family Damian secretly wanted more than anything. Sophie noticed him first. "Daddy!" Amara looked up instantly. Their eyes met, and immediately, the memory of last night returned between them. The candlelight, the storm, the kiss. A soft tension filled the room instantly. Sophie narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "Why are both of you looking weird?" Damian cleared his throat immediately. "We're not. You are." Amara quickly hid a smile. Sophie crossed her arms dramatically. You're both acting like people in those boring romance movies Grace watches. Damian nearly choked. Amara burst into laughter while Sophie looked extremely proud of herself. The little girl suddenly gasped. Wait! Her eyes widened dramatically. You kissed! The room froze. Amara's face turned bright red instantly. Damian looked caught for perhaps the first time in his adult life. Sophie pointed accusingly between them. I knew it! How exactly did you know? Damian asked carefully. Because Daddy stopped being grumpy. Amara laughed so hard tears nearly filled her eyes. Even Damian couldn't stop himself from smiling. Sophie jumped excitedly on the bed. Does this mean Amara is staying forever? Silence followed immediately. The question landed much deeper than the little girl realized. Amara's smile faded slightly as uncertainty returned. She glanced toward Damian nervously, but Damian never looked away from her. If she wants to, he said softly. Something inside Amara's chest melted completely. Sophie screamed happily and hugged Amara tightly. I knew it! I knew it! Amara laughed emotionally while hugging her back. And standing there watching them together, Damian realized something terrifyingly simple. This already felt like family. The mansion changed even more after that morning. Not because Damian and Amara openly discussed their feelings. In fact, neither knew how to. Everything between them still felt fragile somehow. New, precious. But now there was warmth beneath every glance. Meaning behind every touch. Comfort in every shared silence. And Sophie noticed absolutely everything. At breakfast, she kept grinning suspiciously while Damian tried unsuccessfully to act normal. Daddy, Sophie said innocently while eating pancakes. Why are you smiling at Amara like that? Damian nearly dropped his coffee. I'm not. You are. Amara hid her laughter behind a glass of juice. Sophie leaned dramatically toward her. He's been smiling all morning. I can hear you, Damian muttered. That's because you're sitting here. Amara laughed again. And for a brief moment, Damian simply stared at her. God, he loved hearing her laugh. The realization hit him suddenly and powerfully. Not attraction. Not temporary feelings. Love. Real love. It should have frightened him more than it did. Instead, it felt strangely peaceful. Like coming home after being lost for years. 3 days later, Damian surprised both Amara and Sophie with a shopping trip. A shopping trip? Sophie gasped excitedly. Damian nodded while putting away his phone. For the baby. Sophie screamed loud enough for the staff downstairs to hear. Amara laughed softly. You really didn't have to do that. Damian looked at her calmly. I wanted to. The simple sincerity in his voice made her heart ache warmly. Within an hour, the three of them arrived at one of Lagos' most luxurious shopping centers. The moment they entered the baby section, Sophie transformed completely into a tiny general commanding operations. We need socks, and blankets, and toys, and tiny shoes. Damian nodded seriously. Obviously, Amara watched them together with overwhelming emotion. Sophie clung to Damian's hand while dragging him toward baby clothes racks excitedly. For the first time in years, Damian looked relaxed in public. Happy. Not the cold billionaire from magazine covers. Just a father. And somehow, seeing him like this made Amara fall even deeper. Sophie suddenly held up an impossibly tiny pair of sneakers. Oh my God! Damian laughed. They're shoes, Sophie. They're baby shoes. That is generally how baby shoes work. They're so small. Amara burst into laughter again. People nearby quietly stared. Not because they recognized Damian Cole, but because happiness radiated so naturally from the three of them. They looked like a real family. The thought made Amara emotional instantly, because deep down, she had started wanting it too, which terrified her. Love had once destroyed her life completely. Trusting someone again felt dangerous. Yet Damian never treated her like a burden. Never made her feel ashamed of her past. Never acted embarrassed by her pregnancy. Instead, he treated both her and the baby with care so genuine it sometimes brought tears to her eyes unexpectedly. While Sophie continued debating between teddy bears, Damian quietly moved beside Amara. You okay? She looked up. His voice carried immediate concern. I'm fine, she whispered softly. You're crying. Amara touched her face quickly. She hadn't even realized tears escaped. I'm sorry, she laughed shakily. Hormones. Damian gently touched her arm. No, he said quietly. Tell me. The tenderness in his voice nearly broke her emotionally. She looked away toward Sophie. Her voice cracked slightly. I never imagined my baby would be loved this much. Damian's expression softened instantly. Amara. I spent months terrified, she admitted quietly. Terrified he'd grow up unwanted. Terrified I wouldn't survive long enough to protect him properly. Damian's chest tightened painfully. And now, she looked back at him with tear-filled eyes. Sophie already loves him. And you? Her voice faded softly. Damian stepped closer immediately. I already love him too. Amara froze. The words hit her so hard she struggled to breathe for a second. Damian looked directly into her eyes. That child is part of you, he whispered. How could I not? Tears spilled down her cheeks instantly. Without caring who watched, Damian gently wiped them away. And across the store, Sophie spotted the moment and gasped dramatically. They're being romantic again. Several shoppers turned immediately. Amara covered her face in embarrassment while Damian laughed helplessly. Sophie marched toward them proudly holding stuffed animals. I support this relationship, she announced. Damian nearly lost composure entirely. Amara laughed so hard she had to lean against him for support. And naturally, Damian wrapped an arm around her waist without hesitation. The moment felt so natural neither of them even realized it at first. Until they both did. Their eyes met again. And suddenly the entire noisy store disappeared around them. Because somehow, this no longer felt temporary. That evening after dinner, Sophie insisted on organizing all the baby items personally inside the nursery. The room had once remained empty after Isabella's death. Damian never found the emotional strength to use it again. But now, soft blue walls glowed warmly beneath gentle lighting, while tiny clothes filled drawers and stuffed animals lined shelves. Life had returned there too. Sophie carefully arranged tiny socks while Amara sat nearby folding blankets. Damian stood quietly near the doorway watching them both. His chest felt painfully full. For years he believed happiness left his life forever the night Isabella died. But somehow, here it was again. Different, unexpected, but real. Sophie suddenly held up a tiny baby hat proudly. Look, Amara laughed softly. That's adorable. Do you think he'll like me? Sophie asked suddenly. The room grew quieter immediately. Amara's expression softened. Of course he will. But what if he only likes you and Daddy? Damian's heart broke slightly at the insecurity hidden beneath the question. Before he could answer, Amara carefully opened her arms. Sophie immediately climbed into her lap. Listen to me, Amara whispered gently while brushing curls away from the little girl's face. That baby is going to adore you. You promise. I promise. Sophie looked down quietly. I've never been a big sister before. Damian swallowed hard. Neither had he expected fatherhood to happen again emotionally. But somehow, this strange, beautiful family formed around them naturally. Not through blood, through love. Amara kissed Sophie's forehead softly. You already love him before he's even born, she whispered. That already makes you an amazing big sister. Sophie smiled shyly. Then suddenly she looked toward Damian. Daddy? Yes. Are you happy again? The question stole the air from the room. Damian froze completely. Sophie looked nervous immediately afterward. You used to look sad all the time, she whispered softly. But now you smile more. Emotion rose sharply inside Damian's chest. He looked toward Amara instinctively. She watched him quietly with soft understanding in her eyes. Then Damian looked back at his daughter. Yes, he admitted softly. I think I am. Sophie smiled. A real smile. Bright, beautiful. And in that moment, Damian realized something with complete certainty. This wasn't just love anymore. This was healing. For all of them. The night began peacefully. Soft music drifted through the Cole mansion, while warm lights glowed across the enormous living room. Outside, Lagos shimmered beneath the calm evening sky, the city unusually quiet after a long day of rain. Inside the nursery upstairs, Sophie carefully arranged stuffed animals inside the baby's crib, while Amara folded tiny clothes nearby. "No," Sophie declared seriously, moving a teddy bear again. "The elephant should sit here." Amara laughed softly. "Why?" "Because he's the security guard." "Ah." Amara nodded wisely. "Important position. Very important." The little girl continued organizing the nursery with complete dedication while Amara watched her affectionately. The room looked beautiful now. Soft blue walls, tiny blankets dot a rocking chair near the window. It no longer felt like an empty room filled with old grief. It felt alive. Hope lived there now. Sophie suddenly looked toward Amara's stomach. "Do you think he knows we're waiting for him?" Amara smiled softly while rubbing her belly. "Probably. I talk to him every day." "I know. I told him I'll protect him from bad people." Emotion tightened inside Amara's chest instantly. This little girl loved the baby already with her whole heart. And somehow, after months of surviving alone, Amara still struggled believing she deserved this kind of love. "You're going to be the best big sister," she whispered gently. Sophie grinned proudly. "I know." That made Amara laugh again. Then suddenly, pain. Sharp. Unexpected. Amara froze instantly. Her hand gripped the edge of the dresser tightly as a painful contraction twisted through her body. Sophie noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" Amara forced a small smile. "Nothing, sweetheart." But the pain intensified quickly. Her breathing became uneven. Sophie's eyes widened. "Amara?" Another contraction hit harder. Amara gasped softly. Fear flashed through Sophie instantly. "I'm getting daddy." Before Amara could stop her, Sophie sprinted from the room. Amara slowly lowered herself onto the rocking chair, breathing carefully. No, not yet. The baby wasn't due for another couple of weeks. Another sharp pain crashed through her body. And suddenly, warm liquid spread beneath her. Amara's eyes widened in shock. Her water broke. "Oh God!" Downstairs, Damian sat inside his home office finishing a business call when Sophie burst through the doors in complete panic. "Daddy!" Damian immediately stood. "Sophie? What happened?" "It's Amara." Fear exploded through Damian instantly. What happened to her? "The baby's coming." Everything inside him stopped. For half a second, Damian simply stared at his daughter. Then chaos erupted. He ended the call immediately and rushed upstairs faster than he had moved in years. "Call the doctor," he shouted toward the staff downstairs. When Damian entered the nursery, his heart nearly stopped. Amara sat gripping the rocking chair tightly, pain written across her face. "Damian!" He was beside her instantly. "What happened?" "My water broke." The words hit him like lightning. Panic surged through his chest immediately. "Okay," he said quickly, though he clearly was not okay. "Okay, we're going to the hospital." Another contraction hit Amara hard. She cried out softly. Damian's face lost color immediately. "Breathe," he said nervously. "Just breathe." Amara almost laughed despite the pain. "You sound more scared than me." "Because I am." That was absolutely true. Damian had handled billionaire negotiations without blinking. But seeing Amara in pain shattered every ounce of calm inside him. Within minutes, the mansion became a storm of movement. Staff rushed everywhere. Hospital bags appeared. Phones rang. Sophie stood near the hallway clutching her stuffed rabbit nervously. "Is she okay?" the little girl whispered. Damian immediately crouched beside her. "She's going to be fine. You promise." His chest tightened painfully. "I promise." Amara slowly stepped into the hallway, holding Damian's arm tightly during another contraction. The moment Sophie saw her struggling, tears filled the little girl's eyes instantly. "Amara!" Amara forced a smile despite the pain. "Hey!" she whispered softly. "No crying, okay?" Sophie nodded shakily. Then Damian carefully lifted Amara into his arms. Amara blinked in surprise. "Damian, I can walk." "You're not walking anywhere." Even through the pain, her heart melted slightly. He carried her downstairs while Sophie followed closely behind. Rain had started again outside by the time they reached the driveway. The night air smelled fresh and cold. Security guards hurried to open the car doors while Damian carefully placed Amara inside the back seat. Sophie climbed in immediately beside her. Damian slid into the driver's seat moments later. "Shouldn't the driver?" "No." Damian interrupted immediately. He was driving himself. Because right now, trusting anyone else with Amara felt impossible. The black car sped into the Lagos night. Rain streaked across the windshield while lightning flashed across distant skies. Inside the car, tension filled every breath. Another contraction hit. Amara gripped the seat tightly with a painful cry. Damian's hands tightened around the steering wheel instantly. "Talk to me," he said anxiously. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. Anything." Despite the pain, Amara laughed weakly. "You're panicking." "I am absolutely panicking." Sophie suddenly reached for Amara's hand. "It's okay," the little girl whispered shakily. "We're here." Amara nearly cried at the sight of her. This little girl who once couldn't even smile was now comforting others through fear. Life was strange. Beautiful. Another contraction slammed into her. This time harder. Amara gasped sharply. Damian nearly ran a red light. "Careful," she managed breathlessly. "I'm trying." His voice carried raw fear now. Not controlled billionaire calm. Just fear. Because the thought of losing her terrified him more than anything he had ever experienced. And for the first time, Amara fully realized how deeply Damian loved her. The realization overwhelmed her emotionally. By the time they reached the private hospital Damian owned shares in, an entire medical team waited outside. The moment the car stopped, nurses rushed forward with a wheelchair. Damian helped Amara carefully while Sophie clung tightly to his jacket. Everything moved quickly after that. Bright lights, hospital corridors, doctors speaking urgently. Amara was rushed into the maternity ward while Damian stood frozen outside the delivery room. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt completely powerless. Sophie sat beside him quietly in the waiting area. "Daddy." Damian looked down immediately. "Yeah." "Are you crying?" He touched his face quickly. Only then realizing tears had escaped. Damian laughed weakly through emotion. "Maybe a little." Sophie leaned against him softly. "She's going to be okay." The simple confidence in her voice nearly broke him completely, because he wanted to believe that too. Hours passed slowly, painfully. Damian paced endlessly through the hospital hallway while doctors moved in and out of the delivery room. Every time Amara cried out in pain behind those doors, his heart clenched violently. He hated this, hated not being able to help her. Grace eventually arrived at the hospital after receiving the news. The older woman found Damian standing near the window staring blankly into the rain outside. "You should sit down," she said gently. "I can't. You've been pacing for 2 hours." Damian rubbed both hands over his face tiredly. "I should be in there with her." Grace's expression softened knowingly. "You love her very much." Damian didn't deny it anymore. "Yes," he whispered immediately. The honesty surprised even him slightly, not because the feeling was new, but because saying it aloud made it real. "She gave life back to this family," he continued quietly, "and now she's risking her own life bringing another child into it." Grace gently touched his arm. "She'll be all right." Before Damian could answer, the delivery room doors suddenly opened. Everyone stood instantly. The doctor stepped out smiling. And for one terrifying second, Damian couldn't breathe. Then, "Congratulations," the doctor announced warmly. "It's a healthy baby boy." The world stopped. Damian closed his eyes immediately in overwhelming relief. Beside him, Sophie screamed excitedly loud enough to startle nearby nurses. "I have a baby brother." Tears filled Damian's eyes again as emotion crashed through him completely. Healthy. Amara was okay. The baby was okay. Nothing else mattered. Can we see them? Sophie asked excitedly. The doctor smiled. Of course. Damian's heartbeat pounded painfully as he entered the room. And the moment he saw Amara holding the newborn gently against her chest, he fell apart emotionally. She looked exhausted, beautiful, radiant somehow. Tears filled her eyes when she saw him. He's here, she whispered softly. Damian slowly approached the bed like he was afraid the moment might disappear. Then finally, he looked down at the baby. Tiny fingers, tiny nose, peaceful little face wrapped in blue blankets. Emotion nearly brought Damian to his knees. Sophie climbed carefully onto the hospital bed beside Amara. Oh my gosh, she whispered in complete awe. He's so small. Amara laughed weakly. That's generally how babies work. Sophie smiled brightly. Then very gently, she kissed the baby's forehead. I love him already. Damian lost control completely after that. Tears slid openly down his face while he looked at the beautiful scene before him. Amara noticed immediately. You're crying again, she whispered softly. Damian laughed shakily through tears. I can't help it. Then slowly, he leaned down and kissed her forehead carefully. Thank you, he whispered emotionally. Amara looked at him softly. For what? For bringing him into our lives. Our lives. Not yours. Not mine. Ours. And suddenly, lying there in the hospital surrounded by love and exhausted happiness, Amara realized something incredible. For the first time in a very long time, she was no longer alone. The first thing Noah did when he arrived at the Cole mansion was cry loudly enough to wake almost everyone in the house. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Sophie stumbled sleepily into the nursery wearing bunny pajamas and messy curls while Damian stood near the crib looking completely confused. I changed him twice, Damian whispered helplessly. Why is he still crying? Amara sat nearby trying not to laugh despite her exhaustion. You're holding him upside down. Damian blinked. He quickly looked down. I am not. You absolutely are. Sophie burst into sleepy giggles. Damian carefully adjusted the baby in his arms while Noah continued protesting dramatically. I run billionaire companies, Damian muttered. Why is this tiny human defeating me? Because he's powerful, Sophie whispered seriously. Amara laughed softly while reaching for the baby. The moment Noah settled against her chest, he calmed almost instantly. Damian stared in betrayal. Oh, so now he's peaceful. Amara smiled. He likes his mother. Something warm flashed through Damian's eyes at the word mother. Because every time he watched Amara holding Noah, something inside him softened completely. She looked radiant. Not because motherhood was easy, it clearly wasn't. She barely slept. Some days exhaustion showed beneath her eyes. But she loved Noah with such fierce tenderness that simply watching her felt emotional. And Sophie? Sophie was absolutely obsessed with her baby brother. The little girl refused to leave Noah alone for more than 10 minutes at a time. She helped choose his clothes, helped rock him to sleep, helped sing lullabies. One afternoon, Damian walked into the nursery to find Sophie reading a children's storybook to Noah very seriously, while the newborn blinked up at her sleepily. You have to learn words quickly, Sophie explained to the baby. Because Daddy tells terrible jokes. Damian leaned against the doorway trying not to laugh. I heard that. Sophie gasped dramatically. You were supposed to be at work. I live here. Oh, Noah suddenly sneezed. Sophie looked horrified. Bless you. The baby blinked. Amara burst into laughter from the rocking chair nearby. And for a long moment, Damian simply stood there silently watching them. His daughter. His son. The woman he loved. Family. The word still felt unreal sometimes. Yet somehow, this strange, beautiful life formed around him naturally. Not through perfection. Not through planning. But through love. The weeks after Noah's birth transformed the Cole mansion completely. Laughter became constant now. Noah's cries echoed through the halls, Sophie's giggles followed behind them. And Amara's warmth filled every room she entered. Even the staff seemed happier. Grace often wiped emotional tears whenever she saw Damian holding Noah while Sophie leaned against him nearby. "This house sounds alive again," she whispered one evening. Damian looked around the busy living room quietly. She was right. For years after Isabella died, grief froze everything inside him. He stopped allowing himself joy because joy reminded him too much of what he lost. But now, life moved through the mansion again. Messy, loud, beautiful life. And at the center of it all stood Amara. One afternoon, while Noah slept peacefully upstairs, Damian found Amara standing alone on the balcony overlooking the gardens. The evening breeze moved softly through her curls, while sunset painted golden light across the city skyline. "You should be resting," Damian said gently while walking toward her. Amara smiled faintly. "I've been resting all day. You were awake 3 times last night." "So were you." Damian laughed softly. "That child has your stubbornness." She turned toward him fully then. The soft evening light made her look breathtaking. Damian still couldn't believe life had brought her to him through something as simple as a lost wallet. Sometimes fate worked strangely. "How's Noah?" she asked quietly. "Currently terrorizing Sophie by refusing to sleep." Amara laughed warmly. "She takes her big sister duties very seriously. She told one of the maids today that Noah belongs to her." "That sounds accurate." They smiled quietly at each other. Then silence settled between them comfortably. But beneath the comfort, emotion lingered, unspoken, growing stronger every day. Damian moved closer slowly. "I've been thinking," he said softly. "That's usually dangerous." He smiled. "I'm serious." Amara looked up curiously. "You belong here." The words stole her breath instantly. Damian's eyes never left hers. "This mansion stopped feeling like a house the moment you walked into it," he continued quietly. "You gave Sophie joy again. You gave Noah a home. And somehow," his voice softened emotionally, "you gave me my life back." Tears filled Amara's eyes immediately, because no matter how much happiness surrounded her now, a part of her still feared losing it all suddenly. Life had taught her not to trust beautiful things too easily. "You make it sound so simple," she whispered shakily. Damian frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Amara looked away toward the city lights. "I'm still the woman who slept on the streets a few months ago." Pain crossed Damian's face instantly. "Amara, I know you love me," she whispered softly. "I know Sophie loves me, but sometimes I still feel afraid." He stepped closer immediately. "Afraid of what?" "That one day you'll wake up and realize I don't belong in your world." The words broke something inside him. Damian gently held her face in both hands until she looked directly at him. "You are my world now." Tears slipped down her cheeks instantly. The raw honesty in his voice left no room for doubt. Damian kissed her forehead softly. "I don't care where you came from," he whispered. "I care about where we're going." Amara closed her eyes briefly, overwhelmed. Nobody had ever loved her like this before. Not conditionally. Not temporarily. Completely. Unfortunately, the outside world was beginning to notice too. The story spread quickly across Lego society after Noah's birth. At first it was whispers, then gossip blogs, then headlines. Billionaire falls for homeless pregnant woman. Damian Cole's secret new family. Mystery woman captures billionaire's heart. Pictures of Amara carrying Noah appeared online beside photos of Damian and Sophie together. Some people found the story romantic. Others mocked it cruelly. One evening during breakfast, Damian angrily tossed his phone onto the dining table. "What happened?" Amara asked softly. "Idiots happened." Sophie looked confused. "Which idiots?" "The internet." Amara immediately understood. Carefully, she picked up the phone. An article filled the screen alongside paparazzi photos taken outside the hospital. Many comments were supportive, but others were vicious. Gold digger. Trap baby. Attention seeker. Amara quietly placed the phone down. Damian watched her carefully. "You don't have to read that garbage." She smiled sadly. "I've heard worse." His jaw tightened instantly. I should have protected you better. Amara reached across the table, gently touching his hand. You did protect me. Sophie looked between them nervously. Why are people being mean? The room fell silent briefly. Amara looked toward Sophie softly. Sometimes people fear things they don't understand. But what's there to fear? Amara smiled faintly. Love, maybe? Sophie frowned seriously. That's dumb. Damian laughed quietly despite himself. Yes, he agreed. It is. Then Sophie suddenly climbed off her chair and wrapped her arms tightly around Amara. I don't care what they say, the little girl whispered fiercely. You're my family. Amara nearly cried immediately. Damian watched the moment silently, emotion filling his chest again. Love beyond blood. That was what this family had become. Not connected by biology, connected by choice. And somehow that made it even stronger. A few days later, Damian attended an important charity gala in Victoria Island. Normally he attended these events alone since Isabella's death. But tonight, Amara stood beside him. The moment she descended the mansion staircase wearing a deep emerald gown, Damian forgot how to breathe for several seconds. The dress flowed beautifully around her figure while soft curls framed her face elegantly. She looked stunning, completely stunning. You're staring, she whispered shyly. I can't help it. Amara blushed softly. Downstairs, Sophie grinned proudly. She looks like a princess. She does, Damian admitted quietly. When they arrived at the gala, cameras exploded instantly. Flash after flash illuminated the entrance as reporters shouted questions. Damian instinctively moved protectively beside Amara while guiding her inside. Many guests stared openly, some with curiosity, some with judgment, but Damian never left her side. Not once. Throughout the evening, powerful businessmen approached Damian carefully. Some acted polite, others clearly disapproved. One older investor eventually pulled Damian aside privately. You're making a mistake, the man muttered quietly. This woman could damage your reputation. Damian's expression turned cold instantly. Then perhaps my reputation deserves damage. The man blinked. She was homeless, Damian. And now she's loved. The conversation ended immediately after that. Across the ballroom, Amara stood speaking quietly with Sophie over video call, while Noah slept in Grace's arms back home. She laughed softly at something Sophie said, and watching her from across the room, Damian realized something undeniable. He was proud of her, proud to stand beside her publicly, proud to love her openly. For too long, society treated people like Amara as invisible unless they served some purpose. But Damian knew the truth. This woman possessed more integrity, compassion, and strength than most wealthy people he had ever met. Money didn't make someone valuable. Character did. And Amara's heart was extraordinary. Later that night, as the gala ended, photographers called for pictures outside the venue. Damian usually hated public attention, but tonight felt different. As cameras flashed around them, Amara suddenly looked uncertain. You don't have to do this, she whispered nervously. Damian turned toward her immediately. Do what? Stand beside me publicly. Emotion crossed his face instantly. Without hesitation, Damian gently wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her closer. Then, directly in front of every camera, he kissed her softly. The crowd gasped. Cameras flashed wildly. But Damian didn't care, because for the first time in years, he had found something worth protecting openly. And back at the mansion, while Noah slept peacefully upstairs and Sophie waited excitedly for them to return home, a broken family that once nearly drowned in grief was finally becoming whole again. 3 months after Noah's birth, the Cole mansion no longer resembled the cold, silent place Amara first entered. Now it was alive every hour of the day. Noah's cries echoed through the hallways, Sophie's laughter bounced from room to room. Music played softly in the kitchen almost every evening because Amara liked cooking while dancing badly. And Damian? Damian had become a completely different man. The cold billionaire the world feared still existed during meetings and business negotiations. But at home, something softer had taken over him completely. He smiled more, laughed more, rested more. For the first time in years, happiness lived naturally on his face. And everyone noticed, especially Sophie. One Saturday morning, Amara walked into the kitchen carrying Noah against her shoulder, while Sophie sat dramatically at the counter eating cereal. The little girl narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "You still haven't proposed." Amara nearly dropped the baby bottle she was holding. "What?" Sophie sighed heavily like a disappointed grandmother. "Daddy is taking too long." Amara burst into shocked laughter. "Sophie!" "What?" The little girl shrugged. "You already love each other. You already live together. You already act married." Noah suddenly sneezed loudly. Sophie pointed at him immediately. "Even Noah agrees." Amara laughed so hard tears filled her eyes. At that exact moment, Damian entered the kitchen wearing a fitted black t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair still slightly messy from sleep. Amara's heart still reacted embarrassingly every time she saw him, which felt unfair after all these months. "Morning," Damian said softly before kissing Noah's forehead. Then he noticed Amara laughing uncontrollably. "What did I miss?" Sophie immediately turned toward him. "You're taking too long." Damian blinked. "With what?" "The proposal." Silence exploded through the kitchen. Damian nearly choked on his coffee. Amara covered her face instantly. "Noah and I discussed it," Sophie continued seriously. "You need to hurry up." Damian stared at his daughter in disbelief while Amara shook silently with laughter. "Did my 8-year-old just pressure me into marriage before breakfast?" Damian muttered. "Yes," Sophie replied proudly. To Amara's complete shock, Damian smiled slowly, not awkwardly, not nervously, like the idea itself made him happy, very happy. And suddenly Amara's heartbeat became uneven, because deep down, part of her wanted it too. Later that afternoon, Damian sat alone in his office trying unsuccessfully to focus on work. His laptop remained open before him, but he had reread the same financial report 3 times without understanding a single sentence. Because Sophie's words kept replaying in his mind. "You still haven't proposed." Damian leaned back slowly in his chair. Marriage. The idea should have terrified him. After Isabella's death, he never imagined himself loving another woman again. Grief changed him permanently. For years he convinced himself that chapter of his life ended forever. Then Amara entered his world carrying nothing except honesty and kindness. And somehow, without realizing it, she rebuilt him piece by piece. She healed Sophie, brought joy back into his home, made Noah feel like his son long before blood mattered. Most importantly, she made Damian want a future again. Not survival. Not routine. A future. His chest tightened softly at the realization. Because the truth was simple now. He couldn't imagine life without her anymore. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Grace entered carrying tea. The older woman studied him knowingly. "You've been staring at that screen for 20 minutes without blinking." Damian sighed. "Am I that obvious?" "Yes." Grace placed the tea down before sitting across from him quietly. "What's troubling you?" Damian hesitated briefly. Then finally, "I want to marry her." The words felt enormous once spoken aloud. "Real?" Grace smiled immediately. "Well, it's about time." Damian laughed softly. "Apparently Sophie agrees. She's been planning your wedding in her head for weeks." That genuinely startled him. "What?" Grace smiled wider. "She told the gardeners she wants white flowers everywhere because Amara likes them." Emotion moved quietly through Damian's chest. Even the staff had become attached to Amara now, because loving her came naturally. "She deserves certainty," Damian whispered quietly. Grace's expression softened. "And what do you deserve?" Damian looked away briefly. "I'm still figuring that out." Grace leaned forward gently. "Damian," she said softly, "for 2 years after Isabella died, this house stopped breathing. You stopped breathing emotionally." Her eyes warmed kindly. "Then Amara walked through your doors carrying pain of her own. And somehow the 2 of you brought each other back to life." Damian swallowed hard. "You already know the answer." "Yes." He did. That evening, Damian canceled every remaining business meeting. For once, work could wait. Tonight mattered more. He wanted everything perfect. By sunset, the mansion garden had transformed completely. Soft golden lights hung across the trees. Candles glowed beside flower arrangements. Music drifted softly through the evening air. At the center of the garden stood a beautifully decorated dinner table beneath the stars. Sophie supervised everything aggressively. "No, the flowers go there," she ordered one poor employee dramatically. "You're enjoying this too much," Damian muttered while adjusting his suit jacket. Sophie grinned. "This is my favorite day." Damian looked around the glowing garden quietly. His heart pounded harder than it ever had during billionaire negotiations, which was ridiculous. He had faced hostile investors without fear, negotiated with ruthless competitors calmly. Yet tonight his hands were actually shaking, because this mattered infinitely more. Upstairs, meanwhile, Amara stood before her mirror completely confused. Grace smiled knowingly while helping zip the elegant emerald dress Damian secretly arranged for her. "What's going on?" Amara asked suspiciously. Grace pretended innocence. "What do you mean? Damian never plans random candlelight dinners." The older woman laughed softly. "Well, perhaps tonight is special." Amara narrowed her eyes. "You know something." "I know many things, Grace." But the older woman only smiled mysteriously. A few minutes later, Sophie burst into the room dramatically wearing a beautiful cream dress. "You look gorgeous," the little girl gasped. Amara laughed. "So do you." Sophie suddenly grabbed her hand excitedly. "Come on. Daddy is pretending to be calm downstairs." That made Amara pause. Pretending? Something warm fluttered nervously inside her chest. As they walked downstairs, Amara noticed the mansion lights dimmed softly while music echoed faintly from outside. Then the garden doors opened, and her breath disappeared completely. The entire garden glowed beneath golden lights. Candles flickered beautifully beneath the night sky while flowers surrounded the dinner table elegantly. At the center stood Damian, waiting for her. The moment he looked up and saw Amara, everything else disappeared. God, she looked breathtaking. The emerald dress hugged her beautifully while soft curls framed her face. The warm lights made her glow so gently it almost hurt to look at her. For several seconds, Damian forgot how to breathe. Sophie grinned proudly between them. "See? I told you both." Neither heard her, because both were too busy staring at each other. Finally, Damian walked slowly toward Amara. "You look beautiful," he whispered softly. Her cheeks flushed immediately. "So do you." Sophie sighed dramatically. "This is getting emotional already." Both adults burst into laughter. The tension softened instantly. Dinner began peacefully beneath the stars. Soft music played. Candles flickered. The night air felt warm and calm. Noah slept peacefully nearby in his stroller, while Sophie happily ate dessert before dinner, because she declared tonight a historic occasion. Amara laughed more that evening than she had in years. She felt safe, loved, happy, feelings that once seemed impossible. At one point during dinner, Sophie suddenly stood dramatically. "I have an announcement." Damian looked immediately concerned. "That sentence never ends well." Sophie ignored him completely. "I just want everyone to know," she declared proudly, "that I always knew Daddy loved Amara." Amara nearly spit out her drink laughing. Damian closed his eyes briefly. "Sophie." "No, let me finish," the little girl insisted. "Because Daddy used to walk around looking angry all the time." "I was not angry all the time. You looked like somebody stole your chicken." Amara laughed uncontrollably now. "But after Amara came," Sophie continued happily, "Daddy started smiling at walls." Damian stared in betrayal. "At walls?" "Yes." Grace nearly choked, trying not to laugh nearby. "And now," Sophie finished proudly, "we're finally a real family." Silence followed gently afterward. Emotional silence. Because despite the humor, the little girl meant every word. Amara looked toward Damian quietly. Emotion moved deeply behind his eyes now. Then slowly, he stood. Immediately, Amara's heartbeat quickened. Because suddenly, she knew. Damian reached into his pocket carefully. And when the small velvet ring box appeared, tears instantly filled Amara's eyes. Sophie gasped dramatically loud enough to scare Noah awake briefly. "Oh my God!" the little girl whispered excitedly. Damian stepped closer to Amara slowly. The entire world felt quiet now. Only heartbeats remained. His voice softened emotionally. "The night you returned my wallet," he whispered. "I thought I was helping a stranger." Amara's tears spilled silently already. "But I had no idea," Damian continued, "that I was meeting the woman who would completely change my life." Emotion thickened his voice now. "You healed my daughter. You healed my home. You healed me." Amara covered her mouth as tears streamed freely down her cheeks. Damian opened the ring box slowly. Inside rested a breathtaking diamond ring glowing beneath candlelight. "I spent years believing happiness ended for me the day Isabella died," he whispered honestly. "Then you walked into my life carrying kindness even after the world treated you cruelly." His eyes never left hers. "And somehow, you taught me how to live again." By now, even Grace wiped tears nearby. Sophie clutched Noah dramatically whispering, "This is cinema." Damian smiled softly through emotion before lowering slowly onto one knee. And Amara completely broke down crying. "Amara!" His voice shook slightly now too. "Will you marry me?" The world stopped. Every painful moment from her past flashed through Amara's mind suddenly. Sleeping hungry, crying alone, being abandoned, feeling invisible. Then Damian, Sophie, Noah, love, family, a home, a future. She looked at the man kneeling before her, the man who saw worth in her long before she saw it in herself again. And through tears, Amara nodded immediately. "Yes." Damian exhaled sharply in overwhelming relief before sliding the ring onto her finger. The moment it settled there, Sophie screamed louder than anyone. She said yes. Noah began crying from the excitement. Grace cried openly. Staff applauded emotionally. And Damian stood just in time for Amara to throw her arms around him. He kissed her deeply beneath the golden lights, while the people who loved them most celebrated around them. For the first time in years, the Cole family was no longer broken. They were becoming whole forever. The news spread across Lagos like wildfire. Damian Cole was getting married. Not to a billionaire heiress. Not to a celebrity. Not to a politician's daughter. But to the homeless pregnant woman who once returned his lost wallet. The story captured the entire country. News blogs exploded with headlines. Radio stations discussed it endlessly. Social media argued nonstop. Some people called it a modern fairy tale. Others claimed it was impossible. A few bitter voices still accused Amara of manipulating her way into wealth. But Damian ignored all of them. Because every single morning, he woke beside the woman he loved while Sophie laughed downstairs and Noah cried dramatically for breakfast. That was all the proof he needed. 3 weeks before the wedding, the Cole mansion transformed into complete chaos. Wedding planners rushed everywhere. Florists arrived daily. Designers carried fabrics across hallways. And in the middle of all the madness stood Sophie, who had fully appointed herself assistant wedding director. "No," she informed one exhausted planner seriously. "The flowers need more sparkle." "Flowers don't sparkle, sweetheart," the woman replied gently. "They do if you believe in yourself." Amara laughed so hard she nearly spilled Noah's milk bottle. Meanwhile, Noah sat in his high chair slapping mashed bananas everywhere, while Damian unsuccessfully attempted to answer business calls around the chaos. "This house has become dangerous," he muttered after nearly stepping on flower samples. Amara grinned. "You love it." He looked at her for one quiet moment. "Yes," he admitted softly. "I really do." And he meant it completely. Because for years after Isabella's death, silence consumed him. Now his home overflowed with life. Messy life. Loud life. Beautiful life. The kind worth waking up for. One evening, Amara stood alone inside the enormous bridal showroom while tailors made final adjustments to her wedding gown. She stared at herself in the mirror almost fearfully. The woman reflected there barely resembled the broken person who once slept beneath leaking rooftops. The gown was breathtaking. Soft white satin hugged her figure elegantly while delicate lace shimmered beneath warm lights. For a moment, Amara simply stared silently. Then tears filled her eyes unexpectedly. Grace immediately noticed. "Oh no!" the older woman whispered softly. "What's wrong?" Amara laughed shakily while wiping her face. Her voice cracked emotionally. "I never imagined my life could become this." Grace's expression softened deeply. "Love changes things." Amara looked down quietly. "Sometimes I still wake up scared this will disappear." The older woman stepped closer gently. "Damian loves you far too much for that." Tears slipped down Amara's cheeks again. Because deep down, part of her still struggled believing she deserved this happiness. Years of rejection and suffering had left scars inside her that didn't vanish overnight. Grace carefully adjusted the veil. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" she asked softly. Amara shook her head. "I see a woman who survived things that would have broken many people completely." Her eyes warmed kindly. "And despite all of it, you still chose kindness." Amara swallowed hard emotionally. Grace smiled gently. "That's why this story touches people so deeply. Not because she married a billionaire, but because somehow, after losing almost everything, she still kept her heart soft." The night before the wedding, Damian couldn't sleep. He stood alone on the mansion balcony overlooking Lagos while city lights glittered endlessly beneath the dark sky. Tomorrow Amara would officially become his wife. The thought still overwhelmed him. A soft voice interrupted behind him. "You're thinking too loudly." Damian turned slightly. Amara stood near the balcony doors wearing one of his oversized shirts while holding baby Noah against her shoulder sleepily. The sight nearly destroyed him emotionally. His future. Standing right there. Damian walked toward them immediately, kissing Noah's tiny forehead first before pulling Amara gently into his arms. "You're supposed to be sleeping," he murmured softly. "So are you." He smiled faintly. "Fair." For a moment, they simply stood together quietly beneath the night sky while Noah slept peacefully between them. Then Amara whispered softly, "Are you nervous?" Damian laughed quietly. "Terrified." That surprised her. "You? Terrified? You clearly haven't seen Sophie threatening wedding planners all week." Amara burst into laughter. She told one woman the flowers lacked emotional depth. Damian groaned softly. "She's been watching too many movies." Their laughter faded gently afterward. Then Damian became quiet again. "What?" Amara asked softly. He looked down at her slowly. "I spent years believing my life ended when Isabella died," he admitted quietly. "Not physically, but emotionally." Amara listened silently. "I never thought I'd feel this again." Emotion thickened his voice slightly. "Hope, peace, love." Tears gathered in Amara's eyes instantly. Damian gently touched her cheek. "And tomorrow," he whispered, "I get to marry the woman who gave all of that back to me." Amara broke emotionally after that. She buried her face against his chest while tears slipped freely down her cheeks. And Damian held her tightly beneath the stars like he never intended to let go again. The wedding morning arrived bright and beautiful. Sunlight poured across Lagos while excitement exploded throughout the Cole mansion before dawn. Makeup artists arrived. Stylists rushed around. Photographers filled every hallway. The wedding venue itself looked magical. Damian rented one of the most luxurious event gardens in the city overlooking the ocean. White roses lined every pathway, while crystal lights hung across enormous trees like stars. It looked like something from a dream. By noon, guests began arriving. Business tycoons, celebrities, politicians, media personalities. Everyone wanted to witness what people now called the love story of the year. But inside the bridal suite, Amara barely noticed any of it, because panic had officially arrived. "I can't breathe," she whispered. Grace laughed softly while adjusting her veil. Yes, you can. What if I trip walking down the aisle? Then Damian will catch you. What if Noah starts crying? He's a baby. That's his profession. Despite herself, Amara laughed shakily. Then suddenly the room door burst open. Sophie entered dramatically wearing a beautiful white dress while holding baby Noah carefully in matching formal wear. We're ready. Amara stared at them both and immediately started crying again. Sophie sighed dramatically. Oh no, she's emotional again. Grace laughed. You're one to talk. You cried because the cake arrived late yesterday. That was stressful. Amara pulled Sophie gently into a hug. You look beautiful. Sophie grinned proudly. So do you. Then the little girl looked up seriously. Daddy is crying already, by the way. Amara blinked. What? I saw him downstairs pretending he had dust in his eyes. That made Amara laugh through tears again. And suddenly, some of the nervousness disappeared. Because Damian wasn't just waiting downstairs. He was waiting for her. At the altar, Damian stood beneath white roses trying unsuccessfully to calm his breathing. The ocean breeze moved softly through the venue while guests whispered excitedly around him. Richard, his longtime assistant, leaned closer quietly. You look nervous. I am nervous. You negotiate with billionaires for a living. Damian stared toward the aisle. This is scarier. Music suddenly began playing softly. The entire venue fell silent. Then the doors opened, and Damian completely forgot how to breathe. Amara appeared beside Grace like something out of a dream. The gown shimmered beautifully beneath sunlight while her veil moved gently in the breeze. She looked radiant, not because of makeup, not because of the dress, because happiness glowed from her. And suddenly Damian's vision blurred with tears. The guests disappeared completely around him. There was only her, walking toward him slowly, toward their future, toward home. Halfway down the aisle, Amara noticed the tears in Damian's eyes and immediately started crying harder herself. Sophie whispered loudly nearby, "Oh great, now both of them are leaking." Guests burst into soft laughter. Even Damian laughed through tears. When Amara finally reached him, he gently took both her trembling hands into his own. "You're crying," she whispered emotionally. "You're breathtaking." Her breath caught softly. The officiant began speaking, but neither truly heard most of it. Because both were too busy staring at each other like the rest of the world no longer existed. Then came the vows. Damian went first. His voice shook slightly as he spoke. "Amara, the night you returned my wallet, I thought I was meeting a stranger." Emotion thickened his words immediately. "But somehow, you became the greatest blessing my life has ever known." Tears filled the audience instantly. "You loved my daughter like your own. You brought light back into my home. And every single day since meeting you, you've reminded me that kindness still exists in this world." Amara cried openly now. Damian gently squeezed her hands. "I promise to protect your heart carefully for the rest of my life." Not a single dry eye remained nearby. Then it was Amara's turn. She looked at Damian through tears and smiled shakily. "I used to pray every night just to survive until morning," she whispered softly. The venue became completely silent. "There were days I felt invisible, broken, forgotten." Damian's eyes filled again immediately. "Then one rainy night, I returned a wallet." Soft laughter moved emotionally through the crowd. "And somehow," Amara continued tearfully, "God used that small act to lead me toward the family I didn't know I was praying for." Sophie immediately started crying beside Noah. Grace openly sobbed nearby. Amara looked directly at Damian. "You didn't just save me," she whispered. "You loved me when I struggled to love myself again." Damian lost the battle against tears completely after that. "And I promise," she finished softly, "to spend the rest of my life loving you and our beautiful family with everything inside me." The officiant smiled warmly through emotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Before he even finished, Damian kissed her, deeply, passionately, like a man overwhelmed with gratitude for the miracle standing before him. The crowd erupted instantly. Applause, cheers, tears. And above them, white flower petals rained softly from the sky, while Lagos witnessed the wedding nobody would ever forget. The billionaire, the homeless woman, the lost wallet that changed everything. And at the center of it all, the family finally whole. 6 months after the wedding, the Cole mansion woke every morning to chaos. Beautiful chaos. Noah cried at sunrise almost daily because apparently sleeping peacefully was against his personal beliefs. Sophie sang loudly while getting ready for school even though she barely remembered the lyrics correctly. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, Amara moved through the house laughing softly while trying to keep everyone alive and fed. For the first time in years, the mansion truly felt like a home, not a monument to grief, not an empty palace, a home. One warm Saturday morning, Damian walked downstairs wearing sweatpants and a black t-shirt, only to stop halfway down the staircase in complete confusion. The living room looked like a battlefield. Toys everywhere, pillows on the floor, blankets hanging from furniture. And in the middle of the disaster sat Sophie wearing sunglasses indoors, while Noah crawled beside her chewing on a stuffed giraffe. Amara stood nearby trying unsuccessfully not to laugh. Damian blinked slowly. What happened here? Sophie raised one hand dramatically. We survived. Damian looked concerned. Survived what? The jungle. Noah slapped the stuffed giraffe against the floor proudly. Damian looked toward his wife. Should I be worried? Probably. Sophie climbed onto the couch importantly. Noah and I were explorers. And the pillows? Mountains. And my sofa? The enemy. Damian stared silently for 2 seconds. Then, unexpectedly, he burst into laughter. Real laughter. The kind that filled the room completely. Amara smiled softly while watching him. Moments like this still overwhelmed her sometimes, because there was a time in her life when happiness felt impossible. Now it lived in simple things. Morning laughter. Tiny footsteps. Messy living rooms. A husband smiling at her across breakfast tables. The life she once prayed for in tears had somehow become real. Noah suddenly crawled directly toward Damian while babbling loudly. Da-da-da-da. Damian's expression softened instantly. Well, he murmured while lifting the baby into his arms. Good morning to you too. Noah immediately grabbed Damian's nose aggressively. Violence already? Damian sighed. Sophie grinned proudly. He's strong. He's disrespectful. Amara laughed softly while moving toward them. And just like that, the morning filled with warmth again. Life after the wedding settled into something peaceful. Not perfect. Real. Some days Noah cried nonstop. Some days Sophie became dramatic over homework. Some days Damian worked too much. But through all of it, love stayed constant. Amara still struggled occasionally with the memories of her old life. Trauma didn't disappear simply because life became beautiful afterward. Sometimes she woke from nightmares remembering cold streets and hunger. Sometimes she still hid extra snacks in drawers without realizing it, afraid food might suddenly disappear again. And every single time Damian noticed, he held her gently until the fear passed. One evening, months later, Damian found Amara sitting alone in the kitchen after midnight. Only one small light glowed above the counter while rain tapped softly against the windows outside. You're awake, he said quietly. Amara looked up and smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep. Damian immediately noticed the untouched cup of tea beside her. Something was wrong. He moved closer carefully. What happened? Amara hesitated. Then quietly, I saw a homeless woman today while driving back from Sophie's school. Pain flickered across her face immediately. She was pregnant. Damian's chest tightened softly. Amara looked down at her hands. She looked exactly like I used to. Emotion thickened her voice now. She was standing in the rain carrying plastic bags while people walked past her like she didn't exist. Tears gathered in her eyes. And suddenly I remembered everything. Damian sat beside her silently. The hunger, the fear, the loneliness. A tear slipped down her cheek. I remember praying every night that my baby would survive. Damian gently reached for her hand immediately. "And now," she whispered shakily, "sometimes I feel guilty for being happy." His heart broke instantly. "Amara." She looked at him with tears filling her eyes. "Why did I get lucky when so many others don't?" Damian pulled her gently against him without hesitation. "You were never lucky," he whispered softly. "You were strong." She buried her face against his chest emotionally. "But other women are still suffering." Damian held her tighter. Then quietly, thoughtfully, "What if we helped them?" Amara looked up slowly. Damian's eyes held complete seriousness now. "We can't save everyone," he admitted softly. "But maybe we can change someone's story the way yours changed ours." Hope flickered softly through her tears. And in that moment, a new dream began forming between them. 3 months later, the Amara Foundation for Women and Children officially opened in Lagos. The organization focused on helping homeless pregnant women find shelter, healthcare, and job opportunities. The story spread across the country instantly. People were moved deeply by the fact that Amara used her painful past to help others instead of hiding from it. At the grand opening ceremony, reporters filled the building while cameras flashed nonstop. But Amara barely noticed any of it, because standing beside her was Damian, Sophie, and Noah balanced proudly on Damian's hip while chewing his father's tie. Family. The foundation building itself looked beautiful. Warm colors, nurseries, private rooms for struggling mothers, safe spaces, the kind Amara once desperately needed herself. One young pregnant woman approached her tearfully after the ceremony. "You saved my life," the woman whispered emotionally. Amara immediately shook her head. "No," she said gently. "We're going to save it together." Nearby, Damian watched her quietly. Pride filled his chest so strongly it almost hurt. Not because Amara became admired publicly, but because despite everything she suffered, she still chose compassion. That was the woman he fell in love with, and every day he somehow loved her even more. Meanwhile, Sophie had become the world's most protective big sister. At 9 years old now, she followed Noah everywhere dramatically like a tiny bodyguard. "No touching him," she warned one confused gardener while Noah happily tried eating leaves nearby. Damian laughed helplessly. "Sophie, I don't think the gardener planned to kidnap your brother." "You don't know that." Noah clapped proudly at the chaos. Amara shook with laughter beside them. The little boy looked more like Damian every month now. Same eyes, same stubborn expression. And although Noah biologically belonged to another man, that stopped mattering long ago, because Damian loved him completely, unconditionally. One afternoon during a family picnic in the garden, Noah took his first steps. The moment happened unexpectedly. Amara sat on the blanket beside Sophie while Damian held Noah a few feet away. "Come on," Damian encouraged softly. "You can do it." Noah blinked seriously. Then suddenly, tiny step, another tiny step, then another. Amara gasped loudly. Sophie screamed immediately. "He's walking." Noah stumbled directly into Damian's arms proudly. And somehow, the entire family started crying at once. Even Sophie. "It's emotional," she defended through tears. Damian laughed while lifting Noah high into the air. The little boy squealed happily. Amara watched them with tears filling her eyes again, because moments like this still felt unreal sometimes. A year ago she slept hungry beneath leaking rooftops. Now she sat surrounded by love so overwhelming it nearly hurt. Life could change so quickly. That night, after Sophie and Noah finally fell asleep, Damian found Amara standing alone on the balcony overlooking the city, the exact same place where they once spoke before their wedding. Warm wind moved gently through her curls while Lagos glittered below. Damian wrapped his arms around her from behind quietly. "You disappeared." Amara smiled softly while leaning back against him. "I was thinking. Dangerous hobby." She laughed quietly. Then after a moment, "Do you ever think about that night?" Damian frowned slightly. "What night?" "The rainstorm." Understanding softened his face immediately. The night they met. The lost wallet. The beginning of everything. All the time, he admitted softly. Amara looked out toward the city lights again. I almost kept your wallet. Damian blinked. What? She laughed softly. I was starving, Damian. One bundle of cash could have changed everything for me. He held her slightly tighter. But you returned it. I almost didn't. The honesty made him quiet. Then Amara turned slowly in his arms until she faced him completely. And sometimes I think about how one decision changed all our lives forever. Damian gently brushed curls away from her face. No, he whispered softly. You changed our lives. Tears gathered in her eyes immediately. You saw me when nobody else did. His expression deepened emotionally. Because you were impossible not to see. For a moment, neither spoke. The city glowed around them quietly while distant music drifted through the night air. Then Damian smiled faintly. You know what's strange? What? If I lost that wallet again tomorrow, he kissed her forehead gently, I'd still be the luckiest man in the world. Amara laughed softly through tears before kissing him slowly beneath the stars. And inside the mansion behind them, Sophie slept peacefully with music playing softly beside her bed. Noah snored dramatically in his crib, and warmth filled every room once haunted by grief. Because sometimes life changes through grand miracles. And sometimes, it changes because a tired pregnant woman standing in the rain chooses honesty when nobody would blame her for doing otherwise. The billionaire, the homeless woman, the lost wallet. That story became legendary across Lagos for years afterward. But the people who truly understood it knew something deeper. The real miracle wasn't wealth. It was love. Love that healed grief. Love that rebuilt broken hearts. Love that turned strangers into family. And as the lights of Lagos shimmered endlessly beneath the night sky, the Cole family lived happily ever after. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel.